Hello and welcome everyone to CFF Global Town Hall Series. And I'm really excited to kick off this topic for us at Cyber Future Foundation on behalf of the community. I'm Valmiki Mukherjee. I'm the chairman and founder of Cyber Future Foundation. We are, as many of you know, is a platform for leaders communicating with leaders from the cyber to business, from national security to academia, from social impact and humanitarian mission to actual global policies. So we address a broad range of topics and a multi-stakeholder platform, and we believe that we have a responsibility, and we owe the community a very nuanced and a detailed dialogue on the future and a shared future with artificial intelligence. This is not a new topic for us. In fact, for the last 5 to 7 years, we have been tracking the growth of deep learning, machine learning, overall data, and the use of data at a scale, especially leveraging the scale of infrastructure of cloud, leveraging the growth in infrastructure, growth in data and digital transformation. So this topic has been in our radar for quite long. In fact, personally, this has been a topic of my professional and academic interests as well. I just dug up a few months back the neural network AI project that I had done in my undergrad project, like almost 20 years back. And I believe for many who are involved in the AI journey, this has been multi decades, and this is not a new topic. However, some of the discoveries, and especially application of discoveries, change how as a humanity we are able to leverage, transform ourselves. And we have seen, and I don't have to reemphasize or overemphasize the transformation that the recent changes and the findings and the offerings from the Gen AI, the LLMs, large language models, and overall, specifically Open AI's application into Chat GPT, and Google's offering for Bard has brought to us. I think many of you that have actually seen this and delved into it have gone deeper to understand how it behaves, have been extremely intrigued. But this is not in the realm of experts. I think this goes beyond the realm of experts, whether for technology or cyber. This goes into the depth of humanity, philosophy, society, economics, and a broad change that regenerative AI is going to bring about and has the potential to impact humanity. I cannot tell you how many hours I have kind of heard through the different discussions of those that are leading this conversation, and how that is shaping up and actually dividing the top echelons of AI business society into how it will impact humanity. There is also now a kind of a petition, online petition going on of about 30 plus thousand signatures for many prominent technologists, industrialists, business, and academicians as researchers to stop the research and the rollout of AI. So this has this has caught us in a storm that I believe will also turn into an immense potential that we could use. Uh, with great powers come great responsibilities. I think humanity has unleashed a power that will be as transformative, if not more, than what our discovery was through industrial revolution, all the way going back to the finding fire and being able to tame fire and able to utilize that for the growth of civilization. I believe that in the overall impact there is great potential, but also there is grave danger. Some of the researchers, including those that have been involved here, including someone like John Hinton, have identified this as an extension level or catastrophic level finding and item. And humanity's life on this planet is very small compared to the life of the planet. We are a minuscule, speck of dust in a big universe, but we are being able to make change, uh, and both positive and negative. When it compares to the advances that we have made, not only for our race but also the society and the overall life on this planet, we have done both good and bad. And I think there's this tussle will go on forever. But we have created when you say AI, we can call it artificial intelligence. We can, and some have even called it alien intelligence. If you look at some of the talks that Yuval Noah Harari, one of my great inspiring authors that I refer to, and I'm sure many of you do and follow, there is a great depth of philosophy involved here, and probably technology is just one part of it. We have extended our body and mind, our capabilities in so many different ways. Earlier mechanically, in the current times digitally, and as we go into the future, moving into the non-carbon forms of intelligence and extension of human capability, I believe, and as I think many of you and in the community do, that there is a responsibility on our part to shape this future. Those that are capable of driving change and scaling it to the level of what we are seeing now, the mass adoption of ChatGPT by itself, and the good and bad that it can do. How is this going to be impacting humanity? Whether it is going to be a tool or an aid for us that we have created, will amplify the capability that we already have, and for us to make greater change, both for our race as well as for the planet? Or will it be something that wipes us out from the face of this planet? I think both needs to be seen. But on a ground level, there is technology, there is impact of the technology on the society, the impact of transforming jobs and our future, and that all together gives us the opportunity to shape it, as long as we can shape it, and maybe beyond, right? For any great technology to be harnessed and utilized, there has to be guardrails. There has to be depth of understanding of the technology itself. And I think there is a challenge there itself, that those that have developed this technology are having a hard time explaining it. When you and how many times in the history of humanity have we had this, that what we have invented, we cannot understand, we cannot explain. And I think that needs to be delved into as well. The the generation of this technology is not artificial. The generation is very human. The generation of this technology in generative AI, or AI in general, is developed by human, by engineers like you and me. Many of us have contributed to it in many different ways. If anybody thinks that you have done nothing, but you have done something, and that is to give data and feed data into the pipe of AI, and there will be more and more need and more leveraging of this data. So there is, when a piece of code is written, there is definitely the biases and the nuances of the person, of the minuscule number of engineers who are developing this, that is definitely there. So the the development of this, of the generative AI, and in general AI, we need to have a very deep understanding. We need to have defined guardrails. We need to have an understanding of how we secure the AI infrastructure itself from harm. And will there be a kill switch at some day? And will you feel comfortable in pulling that kill switch? I think this has been a emotional and you know development over time, and this will only continue to grow. So with that, let me introduce some of my friends and colleagues who are in this dialogue and discussion today, and adding up onto this conversation, bringing more insights and developing this in a way that we can shape this event today. And the town hall has been distributed into three portions. The first portion that my friends here are going to help me shape up is the open discussion. We will have as broad as possible the implication, the nuances, the apprehensions, and the excitement brought through this discussion. The second portion of this conversation is going to be a presentation by DHS, Critical Infrastructure and Security Infrastructure Agency, by the Deputy Director Nitin Natarajan. He's going to speak not only about AI, but also some of the applications, especially in the nuanced applications in healthcare. And then the third segment of today's town hall is going to have two panels, and there'll be a little bit more structured conversations around responsible AI. We'll talk about governance oversight, and then feel free to, even in the overall conversation, bring those up, tee up those topics, and then subsequently we'll close with some of the techniques, technologies, and talent that we need to put together a framework and execute on that plan in the subsequent years. So with that, I welcome this great colleagues of mine to come and delve into this deeper. Let's start with some introductions. In my screen, I see Justin, gone, followed by Stephen Singh, followed by Serge Christians, Malcolm, and then Sam. So let me just go, and make it easy. Not put the AI hat on, but the human easy hat on, and let me invite my good friend and colleague Justin Grice to start and kick off with the introduction.
Sure. Thank you, Val. I appreciate it. First off, let me do a sound check. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you can.
Okay. Perfect. Well, Val, thank you again for the invitation, and so nice to see so many familiar faces, and great to be here, and I really appreciate this. This is such an important topic. I've been having a lot of conversations with boards and management teams and senior executives on what to do with AI and generative AI. And you're right, this is a critical topic. The bell has been rung and we can't unring it. And so the question is, how do we control it? How do we put the guardrails in place to ensure secure and responsible AI? So looking forward to the dialogue today. Just by way of introduction, my name is Justin Grace. I work for McKinsey & Company. I'm a partner. I lead the North America cybersecurity practice for McKinsey. Our role is to help elevate the conversation of cybersecurity to the board. We've seen consistently that cybersecurity has been relegated as a technical issue for years and years and years, and our job is to make cybersecurity a board level issue. It is, and whether it is forced upon the board or forced upon the executive management team, or whether it is it is embraced as a business issue, that is what we fundamentally do. 20 years of cybersecurity, digital technology, and consulting experience. Prior to my time at McKinsey, I was in consulting, and Val and I worked together, and lots of good memories working with you, Val. I teach. I'm on the faculty at Indiana University, write, research, and live this stuff. Serve on several boards where I chair audit committees and think about this stuff constantly. So happy to be here, and thank you again for the opportunity. I'll turn it over to several of my other panelists to introduce themselves.
Excellent. Thank you, Justin. Good to have you here. Stephen, over to you, sir.
Thanks, Val. I appreciate the intro, and it resonates what Justin said. As you look back just a month ago at RSA, you couldn't walk by a booth or see a presentation that didn't have some nomenclature of .ai behind it. So the euphoria is incredible. I think what we'll be talking about today is just grounding the reality. And when we start hearing words such as hallucination, terms such as weaponization, and the end of life, it becomes a little bit horrifying as to thinking the worst case scenario. I'd rather talk about the best case scenario, because yes, there are risks associated with this, but with proper guardrails, controls, intelligence, and monitoring, this becomes a tool of advancement. Whether it's an engine that's able to pass the bar exam, creating videos and images that never been thought of before, and most importantly, driving productivity. At that event, had a really healthy conversation with the CISO from a financial firm, and one of the topics happened to have been the cat was out of the house. Most of the business units are utilizing their data now within one of the large language models, and they're using it for passive investment strategies. Once the CISO realized it, he called timeout. And what you can't understand, what you can't control, you stop. Suddenly the business units weren't able to do what they were supposed to be doing. And it became a very partisan discussion, as we found out. And of course, the business wins because they have a brand new productivity tool. So I think as part of this conversation, it's going to be healthy as we balance this out, the risk reward between the future of AI and how it helps enable business. Similar model, 25 years in the industry, cybersecurity, both in consulting, enterprise side, and also on the vendor community here at Zscaler, one of the industry leading cybersecurity providers in the world.
Okay, great, Stephen. Thank you for the intro and background. Serge, do you want to go next?
Greetings from Singapore. I'm a CISO and work in data privacy as well. A lot going on here in Asia. And I just heard, I think Stephen say, bringing cybersecurity to the board and make it a board issue. Well, we all know it should be a no-brainer, but we also know we're working very hard to educate the boards to understand actually that their biggest risk nowadays is their cyber risk, because all companies are digital nowadays or digitalized fully. So yeah, that's what my daily task is mostly. Next to that, keeping track, of course, of all the developments, of which AI is, I think, the most concerning one at the moment, combined with the geopolitical stress that we have, especially around this area. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you, Serge, for joining the late end of your day. Sam, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm calling in from Geneva, so closing off the day as well. At the Cyber Peace Institute, I mean, we're an NGO based in Geneva, and we work on cybersecurity and try to assist other NGOs in advancing and improving their cybersecurity. And AI obviously has been part of cybersecurity for a long time. No need to dive into that, but more recently now with generative AI, we're starting to ask ourselves what does this mean for our partners, for NGOs? So I think here, I mean, Val, you mentioned before the excitement. There is some excitement around here. Like we see these new tools, and we see the possibilities in educating, in creating really easy and cheap curriculums for staff members of NGO to educate themselves on cybersecurity. We see that maybe so in the future, but we see the chances of generative AI to actually help in the cybersecurity process. But we also have worries. I mean, generative AI, the safety of it in terms of data protection and privacy is still kind of iffy, especially if you use commercially like free tools that are online. And recently we were seeing an increasing amount of actually hackers or threat actors using generative AI to produce their own malware. So, I mean, that also is still in the future. It's not quite at a high danger level, but those are both exciting and both worrying trends that we're seeing. And so, yeah, this is what we've been thinking about lately, and I'm excited to be here with you guys.
Okay, thank you, Sam. I think, the overall cyber peace concept and the work that you're doing is going to be really critical to, define the way forward for us. So looking forward to hear more about that. Malcolm, how about you go next?
Thanks, Val. Hey, it's interesting, this dialogue. We've been here before many times with technologians, and we get this, ooh, it's all scary. And, I remember back in my early days at Intel, moving from mainframe mail to client server email. Oh my God, scary. The internet. I remember the head of the audit committee basically wanting to put browsers on everybody's desktops. And I was the finance person. I did an enterprise license with Netscape to allow for ubiquitous internet access. So we've been in these issues before, whether it be transitions to laptops, wireless, mobile phones, social computing. we've done this before. The problem that we have is controls have always lagged the technology innovation. And that's primarily because the security industry has lagged, because the security industry that profits from the insecurity of computing doesn't make money until there's real risk issues. Now, for me, even when I was so at Intel almost 20 years ago, in the mid 2000s, the data science team actually reported to me. It was under the HR IT team. And so it was all big data and analytics. And then when I left Intel, I went to Silence, where I was chief security and trust officer, arguably the first cybersecurity company to really utilize and adopt machine learning and artificial intelligence, bend the curve of risk, and apply it in cybersecurity space. And since then, I've been dabbling with a bunch of other startups that embed artificial intelligence and machine learning into their technology. So I've always believed in the hope and promise of technology to connect and enrich lives and create social and economic benefit. That's why I've been in the tech industry for so long. But at the same time as our opportunities to grow, so do our obligations to do it right. So I think out of these dialogues, we've got to figure out how to move faster in applying appropriate controls to what I call to enable. Protect to enable the people, the data, and the business, leveraging the technology to do good while minimizing the potential of risk, and hopefully, again, giving an optimization between the risks that we're faced with and the opportunities we have ahead.
Thanks for rightly pointing out. I think, the application of AI in security will be as crucial as the securing AI itself. So I think there's a dual role that we play in this area. So thank you, Malcolm. We'll come back to this and deeper. Ira, thanks for joining us. Your background, and I'm sure a lot of folks know Ira, but would love to introduce.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Ira Winkler, currently CISO for Size Security, which is a company focused on cyber risk optimization. And also, ironically, we deal, the product is primarily a machine learning product. And the reason I say that is not to say it's anything special, but the fact is, and I agree so much with what Malcolm said, in that we've been using, going to this problem, we have been using artificial intelligence and machine learning in one way or another since the 1960s, give or take, depending on how you define it. I don't think a lot, and frankly, I don't think anybody defined it yet, but at the end of the day, really what machine learning and artificial intelligence is really just more advanced mathematical algorithms that allows for the use and incorporation of big data more effectively. Yes, there's some other neural network type of things, which is the end of the day machine, mathematical algorithms. But we really need to realize that we have been doing this for decades. And much to Malcolm said, every time there's a new technology, everybody somehow thinks, oh my God, we got to stop. We got to realize how it's going and all that. And in some ways that's correct. Like, I think I'm really dating myself here, but for the people who remember the beginning of the World Wide Web, the first web browser, Mosaic, there was no security embedded within it or the underlying infrastructure until version 1.2. Now we have machine learning and we have artificial intelligence. And yes, there are problems with that we need to be proactive with, much like we needed to be proactive with the early versions of the World Wide Web. And it's admittedly more complicated now, I'm not going to lie, but we seem to forget that, yes, bad people have the ability to start using AI themselves, and they will, much like they use cloud computing for their own purposes, much like they use distributed computing and botnets, which essentially was peer-to-peer computing at the end of the day, which good guys theoretically invented. And what we have to realize is we just need to understand what are the underlying cybersecurity concerns. And if we can't address them proactively, like, for example, a lot of companies putting sensitive data on the World Wide Web without having protections for it, luckily people were just starting to experiment with it and not really put too much sensitive data there. But we just need to realize, yes, we need to go ahead and know that bad people will be more efficient at what they do because of this. And frankly, that just means we have to be more efficient. And at the same time, we have to realize what are the vulnerabilities and do a threat assessment, a threat modeling internally, just like we should be doing with every other technology out there. And ignorance, in my opinion, is no justification for irrational fear, which I think is what we have now. I mean, humanity will end within 10 years because of artificial intelligence. I mean, what moron said that? And if I'm going to go ahead and listen, to these people, what's their track record of being right? The world should have ended because of artificial intelligence, according to them. I think it was, 2017 or something like that? It hasn't happened yet, and we need to be more rational. And the way to do that is to just, what are the real risks, and what are we going to do about it? And I'll leave it at that for now, since it's an introduction.
Well, I think that's a very practical way of looking at it, and I'm sure it's still very divided how it will be and what is to come up. So again, circling back, maybe Justin, I'd share the mic with you on the open concerns and opportunities, right? A little bit broader the aperture on this.
Sure, Val. Maybe a good place to start is I'll just share a couple of things. So earlier this year, we did a study and on generative AI specifically. It was, you'd have to be living under a rock to see the uses and the explosion and adoption of generative AI. And so we did a study for companies to see whether or not they were adopting it or had plans to adopt generative AI, and whether there was a framework for responsible and trusted use and a framework in place for those companies that were thinking about adopting it. And unsurprisingly, there was a lot of excitement about generative AI. 57% of the CXOs, the executives that we surveyed, reported that they were implementing some kind of generative AI program. So if you extrapolate that across, say, the Fortune 500, it was a key priority to them. It was key to their strategy. It was key to whatever it was that they were doing. And the non-technical CXOs reported implementing the generative AI to be a key priority. So whether you were technical or not technical, it was embedded and implicit in their strategy. And we've seen that number go up. The problem was that 86% of them had no program in place to control. So I think this was to Malcolm's point that there was no framework, and it was a lagging set of controls, a lagging program, and it was absolutely the case. 9% of those CXOs felt very prepared. So it is core to the business strategy, but they felt totally unprepared. And I mean, this is black and white. The data supports it. So, they're just even putting out some kind of framework, some set of controls. As we think about it, and this is, we'll put this out there maybe as just a provocative conversation. We think that responsible AI and this can apply to generative AI or AI in general, is sort of composed of 5 primary dimensions. So Val, I love what you said about the human aspect in your opening. So the first aspect of responsible AI is the human-centric AI development and deployment embeds the human oversight that incorporates diverse perspectives and aligns with an organizational values. And that has to be implicit in whatever algorithms and whatever gets baked into an AI program. The second one is fairness and trustworthiness and inclusive AI to prevent bias and discrimination. Third is this notion of transparency and explainability. This is hard, right? Because it's oftentimes it's black box, right? What goes in, something comes out, and you don't know what goes in and what goes out, and the explainability aspect. Next is the data protection, privacy, security, that securing the entire environment. And I think, Stephen, you mentioned the RSA, walking around the floor, and I think that's the biggest opportunity. Malcolm, you and I have talked about this, is we're going to see a whole slew of companies protecting both the infrastructure, the data, the processing, the environment around the entire AI infrastructure in the coming years, and we're already starting to see that. And then finally, the kind of the ongoing monitoring and evaluation of AI systems to ensure that it's ethical and it meets social standards. So those five aspects.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think that kind of is probably the starting point, and I am sure there are multiple starting points being proposed. I believe what you just outlined is definitely a key set of starting points that we need to have. Again, just to kind of take on what Ira mentioned about every new technology that we have unleashed always has people on the edge, and I think as we go and democratize technology, as more and more people have access to the awesome power. I mean, know how many people had access to infrastructure before cloud democratized infrastructure, and how the APIs democratized how applications talk to each other, and now how OpenAI and ChatGPT and LLMs have democratized the access to the collective intelligence human has, and I think that's where the concern is, and where we need to put guardrails. So thank you, Justin, for your thoughts. Stephen, we'll go to you next to get a sense of, from a technology standpoint, and you along with a couple of our other friends here have that background and also developing, right? So when it comes to guardrails and also corporate responsibility, what is your take on it, and how are you seeing the vendor community address that?
That's a great question, Val. I'm going to step back and just phrase one word, two words: critical thinking. And with critical thinking, it lets you have a very selective eye as to what good looks like. And as we take a look at more use of these large language models, we sometimes lose sight of what good looks like. And we struggle with fact from fiction. And when you brought up that point as to what the technology industry is looking at, there are so many guardrails that don't exist. And let's just start in the consumer space. The amount of misinformation now that's being fed into these models is unprecedented. And the output happens to be falsely created visual recognitions, images, anything you see in social media out there today. You take a great deal of scrutiny as to what is actually fact from fiction. I'll go back to that critical thinking now within the cybersecurity realm. Not only is it something that's impacting the consumer space, it's now actually impacting the enterprise space. And we can choose code bases as being a great example. GitHub, Git were amazing code bases for data repository and extraction to accelerate your code development. Sometimes they were highly creditable, other times they weren't. Now suddenly we're seeing code bases not just being drawn from these language models, we're actually seeing these language models writing the code. So now suddenly you have double the question as to the integrity of the source code and the code that's been developed and the algorithm behind it. So the critical thinking is actually, I think, what's missing today. And it goes back to my opening comment. What we don't understand, what we can't control, we stop. And I think this is a great point as to where some of the technology vendors can provide the most value as we think about these complex systems and how it's going to be impacting customers purchasing it, whether it's a consumer or an enterprise.
And I completely support that in the and extend that the concept that critical thinking with respect to actually implementing that, making it transparent, making it available to others. I think there's definitely that debate that's been going on as to the OpenAI as a for-profit versus non-for-profit. If you deeply dissect that problem, you can go all the way until how the governance structures need to be and could be, how the data will be used, and how it will impact the broader humanity. So with that, let me transition to you, Serge, as someone responsible for securing enterprise as a CISO. How do you see this impacting the short term and the long term implication of protecting the enterprise?
Yeah, I think like Ira and Malcolm already said, we've been here before. New technology that scares us has been around always. So I'm sure we'll find a way around it. And I'm also sure that these are just baby steps of what's ahead of us. There's a lot more to come. Having said that, in cybersecurity, it's still very difficult to explain to the board and to employees the simple basic hygiene parts of cybersecurity, which would be so great if everybody understood that by now. We're still working on it. So things that might seem simple are not simple at all to implement in every level of an organization when we talk security. So now when we talk AI, actually the first thing I think we need to do is to start AI awareness training, so everybody in the company understands what we're talking about. We've been doing cybersecurity awareness training for years and years and years now. It's written down in regulations, and we do it compliant-wise, and everybody understands it's important. Now we need to, I think, step up and translate that to AI. It's new for everybody. I mean, that's why we're here talking about it. And when we're talking about it, the rest of the world is talking about it. It's new for everybody. And I think it's important that we, as soon as possible, make everybody in the company aware what the risks are of using AI, because there has been some great examples out there that went very wrong, exposing IP and private data. So let's try that one too, as soon as possible, as fast as possible.
Sure. So I think, in terms of getting people awareness, there also has to be something concrete to tell, right? And I think that's where we are struggling in terms of what do we tell, how do we map it back to the general cyber hygiene. In my role, and I'm sure one of my colleagues are going to come, Chris Trehan is going to talk about it later in the subsequent panels about addressing this as a DLP issue, right? Especially on the IP side. And combining that with the security awareness as to what you can do and should do to ensure that you continue to protect IP and protect data of our customers, protect the data of the enterprise. I'll take a quick turnaround on this one and probably go in a broader sense on the impact of this on two aspects. One is critical infrastructure in more in the humanitarian sense of technology industries, such as healthcare and all. And the other is the whole issue of misinformation, disinformation that we have already been struggling with. And Sam, I'd turn to you to give us a little bit of sense of where this stands with respect to the broader cyber peace goals that we have. Some of the things that we have been already struggling with in this case, social media included. I mean, the whole deep fake was there before ChatGPT became as widespread as it is now, and the capabilities that are available to the adversaries and the evil in us, in the humanity versus those that are trying to good. So give you the stage to talk about some of the goals and how we can address this issue through the lens of cyber peace.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned critical infrastructure. Obviously, this is central to what we do and what we're interested in. I don't know to what extent we can already link that together with, let's say, this new wave of AI. But I think the other part of what you mentioned, talking about disinformation, I think that is really crucial, because with these new capabilities, creating disinformation will just be so much easier. And combining that with social media will just make for a very, very dangerous concoction. One thing that I was thinking about earlier or before is just the incredible rate at which this technology has been democratized in the past months, let's say. I don't know. I think it took a month to reach 1 million users on ChatGPT, and that's just one provider of its own. And I think that poses very unique challenges just because the entire world is already using these technologies. If you compare it to, let's say, more traditional cybersecurity, I mean, colleagues mentioned at the beginning of the internet and all these steps that there was the same fear about these new technologies. I think luckily then the user base was still very small or took a slower time to kind of grow, while now we see this explosion. And bringing it back to our center of interest, like civil society organizations, they are already starting to use these technologies a few months in without having the time and capacity to do all of these, I think you mentioned, like critical thinking, risk assessments, really trying to understand what policies to implement at an organizational level. And for organizations that don't have the resources to do that, but still really quickly start jumping on this democratized technology, I think that poses the biggest threat in this sense, is that it's a technology that everyone wants to have access to and has access to, and that organizations and individuals will forget to apply this critical thinking to these new technologies.
Very well said. I think the collective access and the democratization of access to AI through interfaces like ChatGPT and Bard now, and several other large LLM implementations have really made this accessible to people. You can do this on your mobile phone in an app, and that definitely changes the game, because it now is in the hands of people who might and will misuse this. This has already been, there have been already reports, and I think in so many cases verified that these are being used to accelerate phishing and preparing very clear and credible phishing campaigns, which was very hard to do earlier. You had to hire an expert on the dark side and make them do this. Right now, you can run a very lean operation and be able to have the same effect. So thank you, Sam. I'm sure we'll come back to this topic in more depth in subsequent meetings. So move on to Malcolm. Malcolm, you mentioned about both your experience in generally in protecting the and enabling enterprise, implementing the early forms of this AI on a mass scale for in your last role, and then now how do you see this wave of OpenAI and ChatGPT and Bard changing that landscape and doing more or not doing more in that sense?
Yeah, well, I think it's certainly woken everybody up to the potential. And I think, beyond just generative AI and the large language models, what has also exploded a lot the past couple quarters is you can find websites, basically open source ML models that are pre-trained. You don't need to be a data scientist to go grab a pre-trained model and start using it, right? And then the cloud back in to go run those things. And the problem that we have in how we do this is there's, in those pre-trained models, there has been research done that has shown that hundreds, if not thousands of them have already been tampered with to manipulate the outcomes. The models have been manipulated to execute arbitrary malicious code, leak personal information, intellectual property. And there's gray space in the ML models that they have also weaponized to deploy malicious code. And so a lot of companies are saying, well, I don't have data scientists. I'm not doing AI. I'm not building AI. Well, guess what? I'm sure somebody in your organization is grabbing stuff and leveraging it and sticking it somewhere to speed up their jobs. Or you're buying software that has AI and ML embedded in it. Mm-hmm. Any security product these days has it in it. If you're buying a CRM solution, it has it in it. if you're buying a building management automation system to have a LEED certified building that is, you know, climate controlled and all that, there's machine learning modules in those systems. So the other aspect of this is third-party risk. And what are you asking your suppliers about in terms of, one, is there AI and ML embedded into this technology? Two, how have you done your security development lifecycle? How have you done your privacy by design? And more importantly, how do you do runtime protection around it? Because even if you do all the upfront stuff correctly in an SDLC, that machine learning module is basically an application, or you could perhaps an operating system in some way. And there needs to be real-time protection of it to detect and mitigate attacks that will manipulate the model, cause harm. We've seen it already. And to Justin's point, there was another study done back April, May that was just released. In fact, I are on it last week with Forrester and Hidden Layer, where they looked at, again, similar stuff to what McKinsey did. But in that, 86% of the respondents said that the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning is not only important, but critical to business operations, revenue generation, customer support. And it's primarily all manual efforts today. And it's primarily, if it's done, it's in the upfront aspects of it, not real-time protection once the model's deployed. So there's a lot of things we need to unpack and uncover and do better on. But, you know, to add to Justin's point, which I loved all of his 5 bullet points, one of the things that I did early on, not only at Intel, but more importantly at Cylance, I created a code of conduct for the data scientists. I wanted them to understand their obligations, not only to the company, to our customers, but to society for what we're doing. And when they ended up figuring out perhaps they might be on a slippery slope, to stop, engage the security and privacy team, engage the legal team, so that we do course correction. So I think we need to, you know, think very broadly, not only in the technical controls we need to do, but more importantly, in again, that code of conduct, the people that are actually creating these capabilities, what moral code, ethical code, responsibilities do you want to impart on them, and set those values in place to hold them accountable for?
I think that code of conduct is probably a key artifact in this whole, you know, toolkit that we're going to put together. And the code of conduct, you know, that you used in the organization, that you kind of oversaw from a security and trust side, probably has to expand now to, you know, to account for the democratization of the technology that has happened. And of course, with time, you know, things are going to sort out, and hopefully I'm very optimistic about the actual use and rational use of AI. But I believe this will be a very key element in the overall, you know, toolkit that we have. So thank you, Malcolm. Ira, let me turn to you as we close this particular segment of our discussion. And I'm very, you know, I'm assured with your confidence that we will get through this, as we have gone through the other, you know, technological evolution and revolution. I'm glad to see someone very unfazed about this and addressing this particularly. If we were to take on a couple of issues that we could deal a little bit more in depth as a security professional, risk management professional, where would your thoughts lie?
So if I'm looking specifically at, okay, my organization is implementing AI from a cybersecurity perspective, and I use that term broadly. So Malcolm, sorry, I'm praising Malcolm again, but Malcolm touched upon a great deal where you have to look at, so I actually have a patent implementing machine learning to detect who's susceptible to phishing. And I stumbled into this. And the thing is, why I say this is, you have to go ahead, and when you're looking at this, you have to look at, okay, where do you first get your data? Because the accuracy of the models depends upon the accuracy of the data, the tests, the training sets, I guess is the phrase that you're using, and things like that. So you have to consider that. Likewise, a lot of people are using, this is a concern nobody really thinks about, but supply chain. Because when you look at a lot of AI toolkits are free Python kits you download from the internet. And if somebody comes up with a new malicious library program, that's going to be embedded within your AI modules, just like all other supply chain activity, software supply chains are susceptible. So you have to look at that. And if they download models, are the models actually programmed properly? And that's another layer that you have to consider, because you're looking at your training data. Is it reasonable? Is it accurate? Does it fit within privacy and a representative term of your data? That's number one. The software supply chain, again, number two, the validity of models, number three. Number four is going to be, okay, now that you have these models up, to Malcolm's point, are you protecting the systems that they're on? Can people hack that? Can people hack the data lake that all this that the data comes from, where people are going to go ahead and potentially manipulate the data to give you false readings on a current analysis, or potentially give you retrain your data set? Because part of machine learning involves constantly updating your data, taking mathematical statistics, and for lack of a better term, if you start to poison the data set by going ahead and slightly altering the data going in and not doing a massive attack all at once to do something, but knowing there's an AI model in there, you can start to take the norm or the average and start putting it closer to where your attack would be. So that's another concern. Then you have to have concerns against, are people going to hack the data model itself? Then you have to consider, are people going to hack the output of the model, this whole supply chain, the interfaces, and so on? And a lot of this comes down to looking at just good cyber hygiene. Again, praising Malcolm. And if I would have went first, he would have been praising me. I promise that. But to the extent that you have this, you pretty much have to look at, I'm just doing cybersecurity, looking at threat modeling, looking at all the concerns from a rational perspective, not thinking the gods have dropped a new capability down on me. How do I protect what the gods have given me, with an ignorant perspective? And we just have to look at it like anything, like cloud computing. I use cloud computing as another model. I love analogies because we have so many. We like to think everything we do is new, like the human problem, like we're the first profession in the world that ever had to deal with user error. You know, that's been happening since the dawn of mankind. And so now we have to look at, okay, how are we doing this? And just take a step back and say, let me understand, as a responsible CISO, security executive, vendor, whatever, let me step back and look at where everything is. We have new vendors coming into the space to look at some of this. I'm not endorsing any of them. I don't know the capability, but for example, I think KPMG spun off a company, I forgot their name, that focused specifically on a lot of these concerns. And I think other vendors will come up, but as a responsible member of this audience, sit there, take some time, and don't be in a panic, but just learn what are the new aspects that come into play with machine learning. How is machine learning not just compromised, but how is machine learning poisoned? And I mean, how is machine learning valid or invalid, just fundamentally as a discipline? And step in there. And I think we're probably out of time, since you said I was closing it up. So I will now shut up and let it go to Val. Who is on mute at the moment.
Oh, there you go. I had to, I wish, I just wave a magic wand and it just starts picking up my voice. So thank you, Ira. And it's time probably to, share some praise, starting with Ira, because I think, one reason Ira is on this initial call, I think is basically giving a very honest view. I admire him for his ability to tell the truth clearly and precisely. So thank you for that. And to the rest of the speakers here, Sam, Stephen, Malcolm, Justin, and Serge, I believe each of you touched on topics that correlate with each other, but also have a specific view on to how to drive us forward without a lot of apprehension, but very pragmatically, inclusive of the different stakeholders that the cybersecurity and risk management community serves in general, but also giving them the ability to do and use the benefits of this newfound power that humanity has now got. And as much as we are awestruck, I believe what kind of history repeats itself, not in the same way. We used to share about the big boxes of IBM computers, like everybody goes back to those I just made a trip to MIT museum just last weekend, and the big vacuum tubes that you see there, I mean, what was big has become small now and in our pockets. And by the virtue of that miniaturization, we have been able to take technology and be able to use it to connect with humanity in a better way, transform it in much better way. There's always going to be this tussle, and I think we are, as security professionals especially, we are in the middle of this tussle between good and bad. And I was sharing with someone else yesterday about my perspective on the good and bad, and a little bit more philosophically. But what is bad for you as adversaries, if you think even about the nation state attacks and all, it is good that they're doing on the other side. They're protecting their country and nations. And I believe we as security professionals carry that burden, if you will, but very the admiring responsibility of us to drive us in the direction where you can distinguish between the two. There is never a black and white in our day, as you can probably attest to the fact that we live in a constant gray zone, and our ability to unfog the lenses and to have a clear perspective, define the lanes within which you operate, and business and humanity will follow that. A lot of the work that we do in this space is around defining those, and I believe we will continue to do that as a community, and your leadership is definitely appreciated and welcome. I believe this collective thought leadership that we have put together and expansion of that into the broader community will bring more light into this gray zone, will unclutter some of the apprehensions that we have, and we will discover the potential. But I do believe with all the optimism that Val personally has, that if we have been able to tame the fire, change industrial revolution to increase the productivity of people, where 1% of agricultural producers can feed 8 billion people on this planet, I think we can do this as well. So again, with a lot of hope and optimism, but of course practical pragmatism and a sense of risk management that we have to do, I welcome us to take on this path and advance. So thank you all, and this conversation is to be continued with each of you individually, but collectively as a group. Thank you for contributing to open this topic up. Okay. With that, I'll move on to our next segment, and we have a very important guest with us today, who will delve into the areas of cybersecurity and critical infrastructure security. I have had the great pleasure to learn a little bit personally, but also grow to learn and admire the work that CISA in general has been doing, and the leadership that has really propelled the awareness, education, preparedness, capability, and capacity of the country and our allies to protect and defend us forward into the future. So without further ado, I welcome Deputy Director of CISA, Nitin Natarajan, to the stage. Thank you, sir, for joining us. I know you're a very busy schedule. We have been looking forward to this discussion for quite some time. with your key and focus areas, including healthcare. I'm sure we're going to dive into this a little bit. That is very close to your heart. But just to make a quick introduction and give you, I have a very extensive background and career. Um, uh, Humble introduction would be, Deputy Director Nitin Natarajan was appointed to serve as the Deputy Director for Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency in early 2021. Prior to joining CISA, Deputy Director Natarajan has served in a variety of public and private sector roles over the last 3 decades. So extensive experience and expertise and insight that he brings into not only the cyber aspect of it, but the leadership, and that's what we're tapping into and looking forward to tap into today. So welcome, Mr. Natarajan, and to the Global Town Hall for us. We talk about a very important topic about that is everybody's mind, responsible and secure AI. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and we look forward to the fireside chat following that. Thank you, sir. Welcome again.
Great. Thanks, all. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today and really kind of to talk about two of my favorite topics in the same sentence, healthcare and cybersecurity, but also looking at the role AI is going to play and what we're going to be facing as we go forward. So thank you for that, for the time and for the opportunity to talk with all of you today. As Val mentioned, my name is Nitin Natarajan. I'm the Deputy Director here at CISA. I've been here a little over 2 years now, and really looking at how we can continue to serve in two roles. One as America's cyber defense agency, and really helping our nation's critical infrastructure, our executive branch of government, protect ourselves from our adversaries from a cyber defense perspective. And then also as the national coordinator for critical infrastructure resilience and security, where we really lead that national effort to understand, manage, and reduce risk to the cyber and physical infrastructure that Americans rely on every hour of every day. These are the things that I think we all take for granted, right? We wake up in the morning, we turn on a light switch, or we open a faucet, or we use our phone. And these things happen and they occur, and those capabilities exist, and that they can be depended upon to exist. Healthcare, energy, banking and finance, the entire spectrum of our nation's critical infrastructure. So we look at our mission is pretty broad, but also somewhat focused as we look at that critical infrastructure lens. However, across all of our mission spaces, whether we're talking about the work we're doing with the federal government, our work we're doing with our state, local, tribal, territorial partners, with the private sector, with our global partners, at CISA here, partnership and collaboration truly are the foundation and the lifeblood of what we do. And information sharing and cooperative action across both the public and the private sectors are critical to raising our collective defense, to raising our resilience against adversaries, both foreign and domestic. We understand that the private sector owns and operates a majority of our nation's critical infrastructure, which is why these partnerships truly are critical. And so we really serve in that coordination role and that facilitation role to share cyber threat information and critical threat information, to talk through challenges like risk mitigation, both of current threats and vulnerabilities, as well as what the future is going to look like as we talk about AI and other challenges in the years to come. And really looking at that vital information and resources and making sure that our partners could access them quickly, seamlessly, and that it is actionable. I truly believe that bi-directional information sharing is a critical element of our efforts. One of the things that I like to focus on, and I tell everybody here when they join the team here at CISA, is how we need to look at information sharing from a way that helps us ensure we're getting the right information to the right people in a timely manner that results in more informed decision making. So the decisions may be the same, but they're better informed with our collective knowledge, our collective information, public and private sector, state and local, tribal, territorial, and our international partners together to help shape our collective decision making when it comes to preparedness as well as incident response in the cyber arena. We also know that the digital and physical security of our nation requires our public and private sector leaders to join forces to really be committed partners in a lot of these efforts. So I know we want to talk a little bit about healthcare. And so as most of you are aware, the healthcare and public health sector is comprised of both public and private sector entities. And so we deal with public health being predominantly on the government side, but also healthcare, the healthcare side of the house, which goes well beyond hospitals. I think when we talk about the healthcare and public health sector, people think essentially about direct patient care and hospitals, but we forget that the sector also includes everything from medical insurers, HMOs, to medical manufacturing, to pharmaceutical, labs, blood, biotech, health IT, mass fatality management services. This entire spectrum of capabilities, resources, and services that are essential to that healthcare delivery taking place. And so when you look at that, it's a pretty broad sector, a lot of areas of high regulation, areas of low regulation, a lot of global supply chain interdependencies, both on everything from precursor chemical production through microchip production, and everything across the spectrum. It truly is an interconnected sector with interconnected IT systems that are really necessary to access, store, and transmit healthcare data, to optimize, at the end of the day, healthcare services and outcomes. I mean, because of this is why cybersecurity is one of the areas where we believe the sector is facing persistent challenges. And kind of across the spectrum of challenges, we're seeing a lot of sectors, including staffing, supplies, and resources for execution. Over the past few years, CISA has seen the healthcare and public health sector increasingly impacted by threats from cyber criminals and nation-state adversaries. We've seen some reporting from earlier this year from groups like the American Hospital Association, where healthcare was among the top 3 sectors targeted for cyber attacks in 2022, with healthcare organizations in the U.S. suffering an average of over 1,400 weekly cyber incidents per organization, or 86% higher than 2021. Additional studies that we've looked at in 2022, including one that we commissioned here at CISA, did an analysis of 77,000 cyber events across 35,000 organizations over the past decade, and showed 57 billion in total publicly reported financial losses and 72 billion data records compromised. Of the sectors included, the healthcare and public health sector was the top target with 16% of all reported events. We know that threat actors around the globe are motivated to disrupt healthcare for both geopolitical and financial motives. We know that ransomware threat actors are seeking financial gain and will likely continue to target vulnerable healthcare entities with a low tolerance for downtime, such as hospitals. We need to change our mindset of our adversaries as well as our victim base. I think in healthcare, especially for years, and even if we go and think about kinetic warfare, hospitals were always exempt, right? I mean, when you look at kinetic warfare, you never impacted or bombed or destroyed the tent with the Red Cross on it. You never impacted hospitals. We don't see that same type of deference to healthcare when we talk about cyber threat actors. We don't see a lot of cyber threat actors saying, you know what, we're not going to attack hospitals because we don't want to have that negative impact. That hospitals, both large and small, rural and urban, are as equally vulnerable to be a target as any other sector. So we need to pivot our mindset. We also need to stop thinking that it's only for large hospitals or large organizations. We're seeing these types of ransomware attacks in urban and rural America. We're seeing them in large and small hospitals. So everybody is a potential victim, and we need people to think about changing and pivoting that mindset. We know that the sector itself is a target for advanced persistent threats backed by foreign governments that are really looking to conduct espionage or disrupt our critical functions and our economic interests, as well as by cyber criminals who are looking at profiting from data breaches and ransomware payments. We know we've seen a rise in proliferation of things like ransomware as a service. We kind of tell people if you wanted to be a cyber criminal in the past, it was hard. You had to build infrastructure. You had to hire people. You had to train them. You had to go ahead and identify an enemy and target. And you had to deploy. Now with ransomware as a service, you can take all of that out of the equation. If you have money and you have an intended target, you can hire these services to work on your behalf. And we see that continuing to proliferate across all the sectors, but especially I think where healthcare is vulnerable is due to the increased strain that we've seen over the last few years from the pandemic. It's causing additional concern. We do know that healthcare is not alone in facing these challenges, and as it is truly interdependent on other sectors, as are other sectors interdependent on healthcare and their execution. We know that this sounds somewhat intimidating, but there are remedies and increasing ability to proactively assess vulnerabilities and to provide solutions. So we definitely encourage every healthcare provider and facility, large and small, to be prepared to respond to disruptive cyber activity by really adopting that heightened posture when it comes to cyber and integrating cyber into your efforts. But we encourage folks to remember that you are not alone and that CISA truly is here to help. CISA works very closely with our colleagues at the Department of Health and Human Services. They serve as a sector risk management agency and the lead for the healthcare and public health sector. And we work hand in hand to raise awareness and understanding of cybersecurity risks to healthcare. We provide a lot of tools and information and resources to help the sector reduce their cyber risk and the likelihood of successful cyber intrusions. We spend a lot of time, I think, in our organizations talking about risk identification. We spend a lot of time talking about risk mitigation. We forget the third leg of that stool. When we identify risk and we don't mitigate it, we accept it. And we accept risk every day in all that we do, but we want to make sure that people truly understand the risks that they're accepting. And not just amongst the CISO community, we want to make sure that CEOs, boards of directors, and senior elected officials, those ultimate risk acceptors, truly understand the risks that they're accepting within their organizations. And jointly with our colleagues at HHS, we're continuing to do outreach and engagement with CEOs, with boards of directors, to really instill a climate of corporate cyber responsibility. We are working with industry and sector stakeholders to make sure appropriate resources and mechanisms are in place to do that. One service I'd offer is we actually offer proactive vulnerability scanning. We're really evaluating external network presence by executing continuous scans of public static IPs for accessible services and vulnerabilities. This is a free service that we provide to our critical infrastructure partners, both domestically and abroad, and it helps provide back to that registrant a weekly report, as well as ad hoc alerts of what we are seeing in the public space. This is something we are continuing to push for enrollment on within the healthcare sector. We were in 2020, we had about 120 facilities enrolled. By the end of 22, we were at 417. But I'd offer that as only a drop in the bucket. And we truly need to look at expanding our enrollment in that space so we could collectively work together to increase our cyber resilience. We understand that this is just one example of what's out there, but it's a start. And it's something that we need to look at as we look at continuing to strengthen our sector's resilience. In addition, HHS has a number of efforts underway. Specifically, they've invested in major initiatives and partnerships to serve the needs of the sector, including their resources on things like the 405D program, the Health Sector Cybersecurity Coordination Center, or HC3, and work that their Administration for Strategic Preparedness and Response is undertaking in coordination with our private sector partners throughout the sector. These are all tools and resources that are available on HHS's website as well as CISA's website, and we encourage folks to take a look. One of the last things I want to mention is that we have, CISA has over 600 people in the regions, in states and local cities throughout our nation. And we encourage you to reach out to your local and regional personnel who are responsible for helping build our stakeholder resilience and form our partnerships, and to work with you in your communities to help you deal with both cyber and physical resilience issues. We have protective security advisors that deal with physical security. We have cybersecurity advisors in the regions that help with cybersecurity efforts, but can also link you back to our services and our capabilities. We also have emergency communications coordinators in the regions as well, who are helping your local 911 centers and public safety access points, answering points, and others. So a lot of opportunities to engage. Looking forward to continuing engagement both here nationally, but encourage you all to reach out locally. The regional contact information is up on our website, so it's an easy way to reach out to our regional staff in your communities and start having that discussion about our services and capabilities that might be well suited for what you're looking for. So thanks again for the opportunity to speak. It's always a pleasure getting back into my healthcare roots and engaging with all of you. And so with that, looking forward to the fireside chat and any questions that folks may have.
Well, thank you, Nitin. That was really great overview of the many services and capabilities that CISA has brought in. I think what I'm most excited about is the awareness and the knowledge of cybersecurity and the recognition of cybersecurity in our nation's overall security landscape. Before this, it was very technical. It was very, it was one of the many things. But I think with you and the leadership at CISA, this has really taken on a giant step to advance the awareness and the knowledge and the engagement with public as much as with the experts. So Nitin, I have a few questions that I think we can delve into. You mentioned a very broad swath of capabilities, and those capabilities definitely underpin specific areas where you have the biggest concerns, right? So, keeping the theme of healthcare cybersecurity, I believe that's where a lot of the assurance need to be in public, and also your focus is, I think, rightfully. What are your biggest concerns in healthcare security that, in general, the public as well as the CISA can work together?
So I think the concerns I think are multifold. So one, I think it's the complexity of the healthcare system and the ecosystem makes cybersecurity a challenge, right? I think as you look at the broad scale, the interconnectivity, healthcare delivery is not a bubble. And even when you look at outside the hospital, you look at private physicians' offices and elsewhere, that interconnectedness is much greater than it was 5 years ago and 10 years ago. I think we've also now pivoted, and we have pivoted for a few years now, to this technological dependence I would offer on healthcare. So when we first started, I remember 20 years ago in healthcare when we started talking about electronic health records, we started talking about physician order entry, and we started talking about those types of elements. There was always a backup of paper, right? We were predominantly paper with some new technology to increase efficiency in tracking and these other types of capabilities. We've pivoted and crossed over to now where we are a technologically based society and healthcare industry that doesn't have that same type of backup. And for years, people would say, in the event of a cybersecurity incident, we're not worried because we go back to paper. We go back to the way we did things. What I would offer is, in today's generation, our clinicians and our supporting infrastructure in healthcare and abroad don't have a backup of paper because they were never trained on it. Yeah. So we can always go back to paper, but we have not trained people to do that. And our workforce predominantly are no longer people who grew up on paper, who could go back to that, but there are people who only grew up on the technology, and we have not trained them to go back to a non-technological based delivery system. So as I look at my concerns, I think it's a combination of the workforce and making sure that the workforce is trained and able to function if there were technological impacts from a cyber attack. I think the other part of it, to me, is that CEO board engagement. Do hospitals and healthcare organizations and medical manufacturers and distributors understand their supply chain vulnerabilities? Do they understand, the risks that they have? Do they understand not just their corporation, which may be a large, global multi-billion-dollar corporation, but that small mom and pop entity that they are dependent upon in their supply chain for that element? And then I think the third piece is really of concern is that the amazing technological advancements we're going to see in the months and years to come. And how do we put cybersecurity first? How do we think about cybersecurity up front? We have a whole effort underway as we talk about secure by design, secure by default. But how do we start thinking about cybersecurity as the front end of that technology and not as something we tag on in the back, and really start thinking about how do we introduce this technology in a safe way into our sector? Because with these great technological advancements and all these great things that we're going to be able to do that we weren't able to do a year ago or 10 years ago, brings with it new vulnerabilities that we're introducing into our ecosystem. And we need to do that eyes wide open.
Well, absolutely. And I think you touched upon many things. The three that you outlined are absolutely practical impact. And I can probably assure you that we are seeing those changes. I'm coming from a board meeting this morning where the board stayed back another 15 minutes to finish the briefing because they were running late from business. And when you talk about business, you cannot talk business without talking security. So hopefully that only extends. And I think not only on the mature organizations, but also what you mentioned about the majority of the organizations which are like smaller and don't have the resources, and hopefully they quickly embrace and activate the resources that CISA is bringing forward. So with that, let's come back to this broader topic that we're talking about today in terms of AI and technology. As you can probably imagine, every household, even across dinner tables, the discussion is what did you do with ChatGPT today? But to make it a bit broader in terms of the purview that you have, how does AI technology pose unique cybersecurity challenges? And compared to the digital technologies that we're currently assessing, responding to, I think there has been a little bit of regimen put to it. There are definitely the work that has been done by CISA, by other federal agencies, and broadly in the industry, we have had some sort of standards, and looks like we have to find close alignment with that. But also, this is quite different. This is democratizing to the next level of access of prowess of AI. So, what are your thoughts around that comparative landscape?
So I think these are the discussions we're having as well. I think I kind of jokingly tell people, AI has been around for a long time, right? People have been using some form of AI. Generative AI, I feel like we've been talking about it, but I feel like we woke up one morning a few months ago and it was here all of a sudden, kind of overnight. And so we're still trying to get our arms around what that looks like. I think what I would offer is, I think what makes this different and what makes these challenges unique is the potential benefit of AI, not just to us as a user, or us as a good person, as a good guy, but to the adversary as well. So I think when we look at a lot of the technological innovations, when we look at healthcare, we talk about even energy and a lot of the other critical infrastructure sectors, those technological advancements are focused on helping those sectors be more efficient, effective, and what have you, while adversaries are trying to find vulnerabilities, right? They're not using that technology against us. They're trying to exploit that technology in ways that we need to stay one step ahead of them. I think where AI is going to be slightly different is AI is a tool that we are going to use for good, and then an adversary is going to try to use for bad. So now we're not only in this fight with ourselves of how do we use this effectively, and this is where I think CISA is really in this unique space as we look at our mission when it comes to AI. We're not only looking at how AI can help us as we protect the federal executive, civilian executive branch, how we create our tools and services and capabilities and all these types of things. We're also thinking about how are our adversaries going to be using AI against us? Where does this help them build capability? Where does this help them build capacity, right? Where something that may have taken a person weeks to do may now be done in a much quicker time frame through the use of generative AI. So trying to really brainstorm what those issues could look like and how we would work to stay one step ahead of that adversary. And when I say we, not we CISA, but we collectively with our private sector partners to do that, to protect the nation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, that's an extension of the theme we already have in public-private partnership, where we enable, more and more, our allies, our partners, both in the national landscape as well as the industry to bring those, capabilities to the rest of the world. Digging into this a little bit more, how do you see the emerging use of AI in critical infrastructure systems? Because a lot of these are still very old, I think, especially in the energy sector, public utilities sector, and you have had a very deep insight, putting together frameworks and potential programs to protect those. How do you see that influencing the future forward for protecting critical infrastructure?
I think those are the conversations that are currently taking place. I mean, we had a chance to meet with a number of energy CEOs. I met with them last month, and a big topic area was AI and how do we look at the utilization of AI within their sectors. I think people are still trying to figure it out of what is responsible use of AI. How do we use AI? And again, I think the title of this is perfect: responsible and secure AI. So how do we use it responsibly? How do we use it securely? And how do we use it in a way that truly allows us to modernize, right? As you mentioned, a lot of the infrastructure we know is going through a lot of modernization already. And so what is the appropriate way in which for us to use AI while we continue to understand the true threats and vulnerabilities that we're facing, and not see it as kind of a new shiny object that everybody wants, but how do we truly use it to help us? We don't have the answers yet, I think, but I can say that I'm having these discussions with all 16 of our critical infrastructure sectors. We're having these discussions within, frankly, the Department of Homeland Security of what role does AI play for us in the department and all the different resources and programs that we have here. What does that look like in the federal government and across the nation? So no answers as of yet. But we are looking at learning from folks who have started to implement this. We're having lots of conversations with our private sector partners as well, and to understand what does that technology look like? What does that future look like in 3 to 5 years? I think the government. I want CISA to be a place where we are not your traditional kind of government bureaucracies, right? Where we are 5 years behind, 10 years behind. We want to try to work alongside and keep up with the pace of our private sector partners. And how do we have those conversations so that we're not being reactive a year from now to what you've already known was coming, but how are we proactive with you to make sure that our future implementation truly is secure and sound?
Absolutely. And then we look forward to that future, and shared future together that we can build and protect the overall society and the economy we enjoy. So extending that conversation towards a little bit more resources, initiatives, and support that CISA can bring in. You touched upon that briefly in your remarks earlier. Anything that you want to highlight for the audience and general public that CISA can bring in? Because I think CISA has for the best part has focused on cyber hygiene, which I think is essential for us to advance, right? The basic things, the 20% that you do gives you a 80% uplift, and they're not very hard to do. You just to be aware of that. And I think CISA brings in a lot of resources that you don't really need to have a lot of funding or budget to do. You just have to make sure that you are aware of it. So anything that, Nitin, you want to highlight?
No, so I offer, again, we try to put everything up on our website. We have a CISA services catalog that talk through a lot of our free services and capabilities. We're going to be launching in the near future a healthcare specific site because of our focus on the healthcare sector, to bring in the tools and resources, not just of CISA, but of HHS and the FBI and others into a central place. We want to try to make things as easy as we can for organizations to find. I think the other thing I'd offer is that, CISA is in a unique role where we're not law enforcement, we're not the intelligence community, and we're not the military. We work very closely with all three of those partners, and they're critical partners to our success. But we truly are in this role of wanting to help enhance resilience. We are in this role of wanting to prevent and to help organizations respond to these types of incidents. So we are that kind of third party that just wants to be a good government resource to our partners. The other thing I'd offer is that, it's people have always said, when do I call CISA? When do I call the FBI? When do I call, so-and-so? Call a single call to one of us now is a call to all of us. And so if you call your local FBI field office, you call your local CISA office, and it's criminal in nature, we can engage with our local FBI field office as well. It's hard enough to navigate the federal government from inside the federal government. I think it's even harder for individuals outside the federal government to navigate the federal government. So we want to make it as easy as we can to say that a call to one of us is a call to all of us. And we'll handle that coordination and work to bring kind of the resources and the capabilities of the federal government to help, and whether this is prior to an incident or post. The other thing I want to flag real quick is a new service that we started doing this year on pre-incident ransomware notifications. So through public scanning and the identification of, and through other sources, if we are aware that an adversary or that an adversary's IOCs and others are on your network, we've actually been able to, in hundreds of cases already this year, provide advanced notification to an organization. So being able to call somebody up and saying, hey, there's a bad actor on your network. They may or may not have dropped a payload yet, but you can act now to evict them off your network. So take these steps to do that. This is something we're doing globally with our partners. So we have countries that call us and give us tips. We've called other countries and given them tips. But in hundreds of cases this year alone, CISA has called organizations and helped to prevent a ransomware attack from happening and prevented systems from being locked up. So we encourage people also take our call. We had an incident on the East Coast where at 7 o'clock at night, our teams are trying to contact an organization because we saw activity and we wanted them to take action. They didn't take our call. The next day they called us saying that they've been locked and they needed our help. And we said, well, we were trying to call you at 7 o'clock last night to help prevent this from happening. So we are really trying to move left of incident, not just be focused on incident response, but how do we look at our capabilities and services in a way that allows us to help prevent these incidents from occurring. And that's one that we've started this year that's been extremely successful. Frankly, I think if we help one organization, it's a win. We've actually helped hundreds of organizations. And it's something we want to continue to do.
That is absolutely encouraging, Nitin, and thanks for highlighting that, because I think the several conversations I've had over years with our federal government partners is that the relationship that needs to be established not just at the point of incident, but prior to that, and then this only emphasizes the fact that many of those that serve in the field have been trying to engage with and expand that collaboration. So the last question here, I have many, but I think at least the few that I think we can address here is that we place a lot of responsibility on an agency like CISA and our other law enforcement partners. What is your call to action for the industry? We are all practitioners. This is a voluntary organization, and we try to take time out of our day job to do this. As much as we appreciate the service that you are providing and CISA in general and the other partners, what do you think we can do better as an industry?
So I appreciate the question. This is where I think it's often some of these messages are better delivered by industry, right? So I think, I know this is a shock to many people. Not everybody trusts the federal government. Not everybody trusts what we say. So being able to get the message out through multiple sources, I think is helpful. I would offer a few things. Is one, help us as we look to design what the future looks like. As we talk about our efforts on corporate cyber responsibilities, we talk about efforts in secure by design, secure by default. How do we work together to develop what that should look like, right? CISA doesn't sit here we don't sit here and develop, deploy, and sell software packages, right? That's not or hardware. That's not what we do. But so as we talk about the concepts of secure by design, secure by default, how do we work together to make sure we are recommending the right practices, and that we're working together to implement those strong practices? I think the other piece is helping people truly understand what that ecosystem looks like. I think that people don't understand the vulnerabilities in the supply chain. I don't think people understand the interdependencies across sectors. People don't understand the cascading impact across sectors, and what the impact of the loss of one hardware or software solution or tool, what does that cascading impact look like? And I think part of this is being able to tell that story collectively with government and the private sector together to talk through how we are working together to protect our nation. I think through that honest dialogue and understanding of where those challenges are, through that honest dialogue of where we are working together to really protect folks across the nation, is where we can build that confidence in our nation, in our critical infrastructure, build the confidence in what people are buying, installing, and utilizing, that it comes with a certain amount of security and safety within. And I think organizations such as this that really are looking at multi-stakeholders, looking across different sectors and different types of backgrounds and experiences to bring those different perspectives to the table, I think truly is key. I mean, we see this when we engage with our state, local, tribal, territorial partners. I always, a state is not a local government, is not a tribe, is not a territory. They all face different challenges. Likewise, every sector is different. Every part of the healthcare sector is different. Everybody who, those who are developing are different than those who are using. And how do we bring both of those perspectives to the table? So I think when we think about organizations such as this, it's bringing that collective knowledge, that variance in experience and expertise to these discussions to make sure that what we're putting out there, does have the support of industry, so that we're not lobbing something over the fence and seeing what comes back, but that we're truly putting out something that's collaborative in nature. It's part of the reason a lot of our documents you'll see are multi-sealed, not just multi-sealed with other parts of the federal government or multi-sealed with our international partners, but multi-sealed with private sector organizations as well, sector coordinating councils, ISACs, and others, as a way that we want to go to, again, have that joint voice as we move ahead.
Okay, no, that's great to know, and I think a lot of this is in practice already, and the adoption of that by the industry and the continued collaboration is definitely more needed as we get into steeper climb against the bad actors that we have, both in terms of nation state as well as in terms of protecting the economy and the businesses. So we have got a bunch of questions lining up here. I don't know how much or how many we can take, but one that is really key, I think, for your interest as well as the healthcare. There's a question about rural healthcare and hospitals which don't have a lot of resources, internal resources. Any quick thoughts on how can we drive that forward where they don't have the internal resources to execute on many things that need to be done within the hospitals?
Sure, I think that's what we've really been focused on, these small to medium-sized businesses, right? We call them, target-rich, resource-poor organizations that aren't able to invest effectively, or that their CIO is also their CISO, is also their CTO, is also their CFO, right? We're also kind of wearing multiple hats. And so how do we make sure we help them? I think part of that is we're looking at our services that we can offer at scale, right? And how do we get organizations enrolled in some of those types of services? We're looking at different private sector organizations that are providing, threat information sharing and other types of data. We have information sharing analysis centers, ISACs, around the country that do information sharing as well, and really looking at letting them know that they're not alone, letting them know that there are resources that are available. And I think at the same time, making sure that we're educating those organizations of what the threat looks like, of the fact that they're not exempt from these threats, and cost-effective ways that they could do it. at the end of the day, when it's to me, cybersecurity is not a light switch; it's a dimmer switch, right? We're not going to wake up one morning, flip a switch, and be cyber secure. So it's what do we do every single day to slowly move that dimmer switch up until we get to our target. So starting with, and Val, you talk about cyber hygiene is something we're really passionate about. Stop taping passwords to keyboards, right? So if that's what's happening in your organization and you stop that, you've raised your bar, and that doesn't cost anything. It costs one person to go around the hospital and rip those passwords, those tapes off the keyboard, versus things like multi-factor authentication and others, which are good, but and more resource intensive. So basically a combination of education as well as understanding that free resources are available, and making sure that those organizations are taking this seriously.
Absolutely, Nathan. I think, if I can tie this back to the point of actual outreach and how actually the rural hospitals or anywhere in the small and medium businesses can be engaged, I think talking to the CISA, the folks on the ground, and reaching out to them, and I'm glad you mentioned about the fact that a call to one is called to many now, and that definitely brings in a more accessible resources, and that can put this to action. I'll probably take one more question here around a little bit more, could be policy question about would standards or even legislation drive better secure by design in technology? This is very debatable, I think, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Nathan.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a question I get asked multiple times a day, right? As we look at it, is this a regulatory fix? Is it a legislative fix? Is it standards? And I think it depends. It's a combination of all the above in the areas, right? We already have parts of the healthcare industry that are highly regulated, right? We have parts that aren't, and it doesn't mean that we should regulate everything. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't regulate everything. I think we have to find the appropriate solution for the appropriate tool that we're looking to do. What we're leaning in when we talk about secure by design, secure by default, we're leaning in with our federal purse strings. How do we look at what we buy in the federal government, to meet, the expectations of what we were looking for? And so, how do we lean forward with that? And none of these are quick things. We don't buy new things every 5 minutes. These are investments as we look over the course of the next few years. But how do we come up with what are those effective elements that we want to see in software and hardware that we're buying, and then how do we use our federal procurement capability to drive what we want to buy to help protect ourselves and protect our data and our information and our systems, and then how does that decision trickle down to state, local, tribal, territorial governments, to the private sector entities, to critical infrastructure owners and operators, and helping guide their decisions. We try to be very solution agnostic. We don't want to push one company over the other. It's what are those requirements and services and capabilities and features that we feel people should be looking for, and how you get that is really up to the individual organization, because there's a different fit for every person. So I don't think it's an answer of standards versus legislation versus other elements. Is what does it look like? And frankly, as we look at this, we're looking at this globally, not just within the United States. So we are learning some great practices of what we're seeing in Australia and the UK, New Zealand, and elsewhere, of what do we want this to look like globally. And I think if this is truly a global push, and at least in the United States, we're pushing with our federal acquisition, we can drive some of that change just by those two levers, and then see kind of where that goes over time. But it's not an immediate fix, but it's something that we want to see how this trends as we go forward in the next couple of years.
Great to know. And well, I think we are right out of time. And again, thank you, Nathan, for coming up and taking the time to share not only your insight but also the resources that CISA is bringing in to the table in support of the defenders. We, as practitioners in this field, definitely appreciate the work that has been put in. As I mentioned, and I cannot overemphasize the fact of engagement, public engagement, having that excitement of not only using technology but also enabling businesses and people to do more. So looking forward to continuing that collaboration and partnership with CISA. And thank you for your leadership. I think there's a lot of outcome from this and the previous town hall we had on healthcare that is to be shared with you. And we hope to hope to collaborate further on this direction. So thank you again.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here and to talk through these challenging efforts. And again, thank you for all that you and your members do. I think it's, this is not something we can do alone. And we know that our industry partners are investing time, effort, and resources into helping raise our national resilience against these cyber actors. And we can't do it alone. So thank you for all that you do day in and day out in helping protect our nation.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. Talk to you next
Thanks.
time. Cheers. Bye. Okay. All right. Again, that was, I think, a very, very informative discussion. A lot of them were around extending the conversation that we've had in the broader channels from specific areas of cybersecurity that we are used to, and extending that over to the new world of democratized AI and access to ChatGPT and Bard, and the way we are to adjust to that. I think if we can sum it up from the last almost 2 hours of discussion that we've had from the global town hall to Deputy Director Nitin Rajan's conversation, is that every change is an opportunity to readjust ourselves to the new realities, but be grounded on the basis that civilization has been formed philosophically speaking, but controls have been formed technologically speaking. With this, I am excited to welcome the next panel and kind of kick off the conversation around responsible AI. Well, we had very deliberately structured this conversation in two aspects. I think if you think about the overall responsibility we have as technologists, as cybersecurity professionals, to provide tools, techniques, train talent to support in safeguarding businesses, safeguarding our society, and the economic fabric that we have, and partnering with allies. This is going to be even heightened with the democratization and access to AI in the hands of every citizen, everyone who has a digital device. Especially, you can download an app and in a moment be ready to engage with the massive amount of power and resources that has been amassed over time to give form to the large language models, generative AI, and overall, the AI progress in general. This has come all of a sudden, woken us up, not because this technology was not around, but because the access to this technology. So with that, I welcome my dear colleagues into the next conversation. I'll include Chris Strahan, Pramod Gosavi, and Sameer Seth to help me drive this conversation forward. Great to see you, gentlemen. And I know three of you bring very practical and very clear insights into this. I work with Chris day in and day out. I engage with Pramod on his humorous but very practical takes on technology, and Sameer, both as a CISO as well as an entrepreneur, bring the technology forward. So welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for taking the time to join us. I'm going to chime in here from the last couple of hours of conversation we had. But first, let's start with a quick introduction. Chris, please go first.
Sure. Chris Strahan, CTO at Acolyte Digital, product manager by profession. I play a CISO on TV, or at least I did until Val was kind enough to step in and take that responsibility over for me.
Well said, Chris. Sameer, how about you?
Sure. Sameer Seth, co-founder and CSO at Balkan ID, identity governance startup. Prior to that, CISO at Amazon Whole Foods Market.
Okay, excellent. So you can see the dual role that CISOs and entrepreneurs play. Pramod, maybe start with a joke. No.
Yes. So currently, my day job is a investor at 11-2 Capital. I invest mostly in enterprise infrastructure, and within enterprise infrastructure, a lot of focus on security, AI, ML, and data infrastructure. Happy to be part of this panel.
Yeah, excellent, and thank you. Welcome you all. So this please feel free to delve into the technology as well. I know you are deep into. Many of you are actually hands-on on this. I love playing with technology, so can't keep away from the discussion. But this is more elevating that discussion to the responsibility that we have as security professionals and technology professionals. Chris, maybe start with you. You have been both on both sides of protecting as well as enabling. What do you think in terms of building a technology with responsibility? I mean, without even considering AI in general, that also is a foundation that we should be built on, right?
I think, now, 20, 30 years of people building technology of various shapes and forms, 40, 50, 60, 80, depending on how you count it. Throughout all of that, I think the key to building responsible systems is building systems that are ultimately delivering on a business need, on a consumer need, on a person's need. And as we look at how generative AI is going to transform that landscape, responsibility, I think, boils down to making sure that we continue to deliver solutions that are meeting a need. When you look at places where AI has really been very successful historically, I think one of the big examples we can look at is algorithmic trading, and a place where the financial firms that are doing algorithmic trading, there's a huge downside if they get it wrong. You're out millions, if not billions of dollars, and it happens in the blink of an eye. And so I think a wonderful example of the type of feedback that you need when you're developing AI-based systems, how you need to look to ensure that feedback about your end product is getting to the people who build it, and in turn they can make sure that it is a responsible system. You look at the opposite end of the spectrum, you look at the chatbots that we're all forced to put up with on a kind of a day-to-day basis, and complete lack of feedback. They ask you at the end for a survey, but I've yet to meet a person who actually gets their needs met. And so I think a great example of AI where it's been implemented, really from the point of view of just cost savings. It's not about facilitating better outcomes. And, it's kind of the example of how to do it wrong. So I think as we go forward, we need to look to ensure that all of our systems are providing that feedback. Read a great story the other day about a emergency room doctor had a 90-year-old woman who had pulmonary edema, lungs in the fluid. Her family, 60, 70-year-old daughters, are in the ER with her, and they keep telling the doctor that she needs IV fluids. IV fluids would have killed her. And, the doctor tried to explain this to him, but couldn't do it, couldn't get him to understand. He used ChatGPT, and he asked ChatGPT to generate in layman's terms, why should you not give IV fluids to a patient with pulmonary edema? Got a great answer, read it to, these daughters, and they finally, you could see the light bulbs go on and people understand why that was a bad thing. So I think a great example of, again, responsible use of an AI product, lots of debate about how AI should be used in healthcare. You can look at a very clear positive outcome in that specific example. And so I think we need to continue to look for those type of examples, that type of feedback, and, in turn, we can make sure our systems are responsible.
Absolutely, and I think Chris, probably this goes on the healthcare theme we have had. Thanks to Nitin and our previous healthcare town hall that we had. I think that's a clear indication of how this can play and how much impact it can have in our daily lives. So it's at many ways it is a question of life and death, and how you use the information and how you present the information. So thank you, Chris, for opening this up. Samir, how about we go to next? You have seen you've been responsible for protecting enterprise as well as now building something that would protect, be a kind of part of that protection ecosystem. How do you see the responsibility shifting from using it to protect versus application versus actual engineering?
It's it's something we think about quite often here at Balkan ID, but generally I think Chris called out a good point, which is depending on the sector, right, that you're targeting, it becomes almost like a Achilles heel when you want to go fast. Everyone's talking about it. Every startup that I interact with is talking about how am I using large language models or Gen AI or some other buzzword maybe that I haven't got onto yet. But at the end of the day, if we start using, for example, a product that's being engineered for identity, and we're not able to pseudonymize or anonymize the outputs based on the use case, of course, right? We could end up with a lot of exposures that are unintended, but frankly are intended, right? So how do you find out what is to be intended out of the outcome without being biased, without being inappropriate, without being an ethical dilemma, right? I think there's a lot of morality and ethics that come into healthcare. I think there's a lot of morality and ethical questions that come up when you're doing identity verification and authorization based on race, religion, a whole bunch of other criteria. And so I'm always thinking about how identity needs to provide the right answer, but not a answer that's biased. And I think for that very reason, um, although we want to go fast, we're probably going to have to do a lot of testing, validation, verification in lieu of having policies and governance, right? And the reason I say in lieu of, because I don't know if we have the governance structures in place right now to limit the outputs in a manner that makes sense for the end customer, because we don't know what the output's going to be, right? The output of an AI system that's continuously learning, um, uh, how can we control that output when we really wanted to do some thinking on its own, right? And it's taken us, what I think Chris mentioned this. I think we've come a long way as a human race in terms of building our own morality and what is ethics for us. And then the bigger question is, as we started to look to expand internationally, um, cultures have different ideas of what is morality, what's ethics, what's appropriate, right? And so an AI system needs to start thinking about cultural nuances as well, which we haven't even tackled yet. We think very ethnocentrically when we live in America, but the fact remains is that as you and I, we've all traveled the globe, right? We know there's some limitations on how you interact with different societies, right? And so we haven't even touched that topic when it comes to identity and security.
Yeah, absolutely. And then while this is a component, not but I think the identity piece is very important based on how you tie back to, say, for example, a multi-factor authentication using face identity, right? And how do you use the data, where it goes and what it touches, very much goes into the depth of privacy issues as well. So a key topic to be dug into. Let's come and move to Pramod. And Pramod, in your career, you have seen many startups in cyber and other areas in the industry from a technology standpoint, providing and focusing on the functionality. And this probably changes in a very different way as to how the responsibility shift happens into building technologies that are going to be not biased and follow some guardrails, not only technology security controls and guardrails, but also responsibility in terms of giving uh, you know a very nuanced output, and that needs a lot of commitment from the engineering community and technology community. What are your opening thoughts around that? How can we assure the responsibility part on secure AI?
Yes, I think when you talk about responsibility, it straddles across multiple domain. Like as an engineer, you want to create like the most kick-ass, most efficient project, and also it depends on the data that actually is available for you, right? So when you talk about response, like bringing responsibility, you have to start all the way from data. Like, do you have the right data, right? And if you don't have the right data, and then this is a chicken and egg problem where you wouldn't know if you have all of the data, right? So we need to spend more time on the data to just figure out, and that's where I think some of the synthetic data can actually help, where we can actually round off your whatever data you have with synthetic data to just make it more comprehensive. But this thought actually needs to be inserted at the highest level, whether it's from the CEO or the chief privacy officer or the chief legal officer. I don't even think this is a CISO or a CIO job. I think this is something more to do with the CEO and the chief privacy, and then instill that discipline and that guideline saying that, hey, at any given time, you need to make sure that we have the right data, because depending on what data you have, you'll have the same algorithms, right? So you need to sort of start with the data, and before you get to the data, you need to have a policy saying that, hey, every project needs to make sure that we have comprehensive data and we are not going in blind.
So Pramod, maybe just stay with you for one more moment around who has the data, right? And where data gets infused, right? So for example, right now, I think in general nuance, you have 2 or 3 very big box technology firms who are actually driving how the rest of us are using this, right? So especially, I don't see yet a lot of application which are the capability to gather that data and process the data and feed into and create a nuanced context. I think that will take some time, and it is to be seen. But if most of them are actually building APIs, or using the APIs on top of, or that is provided by the big, OpenAI systems or Google systems on the BART side, and those are the ones driving. So any thoughts around how that can be used as a foundation, but then you use your data to give it more context and nuance and be responsible around that, because there is some where you have a little bit of control, and there is you don't have a lot of control on how they're building, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So you can actually attack this from two different angles. One, if you're starting with the foundational model and fine tuning it, you can assume that it is what it is, and then round it about with different data. I think what you want to do at that point is just stress test the data, like feed it data. I think what's not happening, I think, with AI, I feel like, is we're not doing much experimentation on the data side and the model side. Like, we need to break the model ourselves. So we are so much focused on getting a really good optimized model from the data, like over optimizing it and creating a kick-ass. We are not stress testing it in the development cycle itself. So you have some data, you proactively create all sorts of data around it, because that's what is going to tell you how good the model is. I think we are kicking the can down the road, where we are creating a good enough model from what we have and then putting into production. And then a lot of times there's no production loop from the user experience and feedback all the way. And it's not a very shorter thing, right? I mean, you have to wait for like months and months if somebody complains, and then you go back and change it, right? So I think we need to create that sort of a tighter loop. But I feel like if you're waiting on production, it's going to be a longer loop. Not many. The feedback cycle is going to be longer, and it's going to cause damage first, and then, so in order to prevent damage, I think we need to focus a lot on the data while you're actually developing. And right now we are just too much focused on, hey, we have a data, let me just get a model out, get a product out. But we, as I mentioned, we should look at buying different sets of data, creating new data using synthetic sources.
Absolutely. So Pramod, I'll come back to you. When I think 2 points that I'm going to take away here is the use of synthetic data, which could enable us to have this journey in a bit more controlled and responsible way. The other thing is actually infusing that data and waiting for the longer feedback loop. So thank you for those insights. So Chris, let me come back to extend this conversation, and probably you can wear either of the hats of a protector, defender, as well as a builder, right? Where do you see us going from here in terms of, I don't think we still have a very clear guardrails established. We still have to rely on the current controls, which I think is the right thing to do. There is established foundational controls that we absolutely, any new technology should be tied to before we understand the nuances of the bigger ones and the bigger implications. So your thoughts on how do we address this dual nuances of protecting, defending, and building at the same space, and how can we draw insights from that?
I think start with basic guardrails. Let's make sure sensitive information is not being fed to ChatGPT, to Copilot. We don't want passwords, private keys, etc. So let's put some minimal guardrails in place to make sure that that kind of really obvious kind of bad things aren't happening. And then I think you take advantage of the power of Gen AI to solve some of the issues that Pramod was raising. I think some of the most exciting cases for Gen AI are, ask Gen AI to generate you a synthetic data set. Get its help to refine that data set. That classic long feedback loop where we're so focused on our model being really accurate that we can't actually take in all the feedback that we're getting from users. And so let's actually take advantage of Gen AI. Let's take advantage of things like Copilot responsibly so that we can iterate on our systems faster. And I think that's where, for myself as a technology practitioner, it's really most exciting that it's not about replacing jobs. It's instead about making existing developers, existing product managers much more effective, allowing us to shorten those cycles and to do a lot of the things that we previously weren't able to do, having that synthetic data set, getting a really full-fledged unit testing data set, taking advantage of Gen AI to help us be more efficient, to be able to do those things that as developers we know we should be doing, but we've never had time to. And I think, if we have basic guardrails in place to make sure that well-intentioned people aren't doing things they shouldn't be doing, that we can then take advantage of that power and look to put in place a feedback loop for ourselves. So as we benefit from Gen AI, let's make sure that we're measuring how much productivity it's adding. Let's make sure we measure how many times people are not being responsible. We have training programs around phishing. We need training programs around how you use Gen AI appropriately, and the guardrails in place to make sure that folks are adhering to that.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, Chris, and especially having in two different independent forums, I'm hearing a reinforcement of the fact that the security awareness programs that we run now need to be extended to awareness around AI and its implications, both from a security standpoint as well as the builder point of view, right? So thank you for that. Extending to that to Samir, with both your lens as a defender on the CISO side as well as a builder on the Balkan ID side, on the identity access management side, how do you see the whole identity access management? I think both in terms of access to APIs to use it from machine to machine, as well as access to API, access to real resources that you use on a day-to-day basis on the identity access management, the traditional sense. How do you see being a gatekeeper for this, right? Because I think we people get access to things, to do certain things, the good or bad, and of course, engineers or curious people will go out and identify new creative ways of application, right? And that's where I think a combination of DLP practices and identity practices come together. Your thoughts on that, Samir?
Yeah, I have so many ideas percolating in my head right now, so I'll try to keep it as succinct as possible. But I think one of the things that Chris brought up that just made me start thinking was using ChatGPT to create an attack, right? To actually create a scenario where I can breach data from my competitor, my customer, or be a nefarious player that can actually get data out of ChatGPT that will help me exploit a vulnerability. I think finding ways to limit those kind of inputs as much as possible, even if good people want to do it, right? Even if I'm doing it to stress test my own system, I think we're not at the stage to really understand the impact of how much data we're giving to a large language model that might be used against us in the future. That's what worries me from a defender standpoint. I think going back to the builder standpoint, right? I was in the Bay Area this past week and I heard this new term being used. Maybe it's new to me because I live in Austin and I'm maybe one step behind the Bay Area, but I kept hearing this term called prompt engineering, right? Why are your engineers not using prompt engineering to develop faster? Are you using prompt engineering to build prototypes for your product at Balkan ID? If you're not, you're falling behind, right? And so I started to think about this concept of prompt engineering, which is really just about being able to articulate better queries of a large language model and have a dialogue so you can actually get the output you want in a manner that can be usable for a very specific use case. And I think being able to create some level of framework around those prompts, right? So that if it's me asking the question, followed by a QA engineer asking the question, followed by somebody in architecture answering that question, I think we'll be able to get our answers quicker without sharing too much information, right? Because not all of us have the ability to do synthetic data or quick synthetic data creation. And it might not prove valuable with the synthetic data. So finding ways to, during the session, regulate that session in a manner that the output is valuable, but the inputs aren't exposing, I think is going to be very important. Like I'm almost thinking of that very simple use case around prompt engineering governance for builders, right? Because we deal a lot with identity, and I'm very, very cognizant of the fact that I'm either going to have to build a very big knowledge base internally and never use an LLM, or use an LLM and be very, very careful what I share, right? So I've got to find that balance.
Yeah, I think, prompt engineering has picked up as a discipline by itself in the last months, just after like the ChatGPT release. And I think the terminology could be misleading, but I think it's technically as it is. Like, you are engineering the conversation with LLM, and as you find the responses, you are adjusting what you're asking and digging deeper. I mean, it can take you to a rabbit hole that I think many of us have been. And that's a revelation in itself as to what you learn. I mean, I have seen the response sometimes go as if it's as a short-term memory. You tell something, by the time you've gone with the fourth or fifth question, it's already forgotten the first context. So I think there are limitations there itself. But I think in terms of prompt engineering, there's definitely some structure that need to be developed. And as much as it is on the prompt, it's also prompt engineering integration with API, right? So that a chatbot or a human machine interaction can happen more seamlessly, and within guardrails, right? So great point. And I think we will get to the next, probably come around and expand on that. Let me go to Pramod in terms of if you think about the technology uprising that has happened just in the last few months. Everybody's API, ChatGPT or GPT 3.5, or those have access to 4, enabled, right? And I think it's that the sense of responsibility on the investors has grown even farther. Cybersecurity investment in the last few years has been immense. But I have lived this life of a engineering, of a product founder, along with my good friend here, Dan, and will join recently, slowly with us. There is a lot of hype in this space, but not really a lot of substance. Pramod, as a long-term experienced investor and now in your full-time role, how do you see this? How do you cut through that, right? What is real versus what's not?
I don't think it's, I mean, every technology cycle, there's a lot of hype, and, people think that it's the end of the world and like everything is going to get disrupted, right? I think that is normal, and I think that should happen. I think, people should get hyped up, should spend time thinking about all of the possibilities. I think that's how innovation gets done, right? But yeah, so I was not very optimistic with AI. Like I've seen this like over the last 10 years, right? So the use cases previously in the previous cycle with anomaly detection and others were limited. With Gen AI, the possibilities are even a lot more. I think the hype is around. I think people are just not understanding. I mean, there's this whole debate about responsibility and how dangerous it is, and I think that is just not the right discussion. And I think that discussion is happening for different reasons. So we cannot harp on it. But as far as the hype and the real use case, I think the use cases are real. The use cases and the use cases are going to be short-term, more limited to co-pilot rather than pilot. So the difference between co-pilot and pilot is co-pilot is managing all of the operations and processes around a technology, and pilot is when you actually replace that technology. At co-piloting stage, I think it's just enormous. It will apply to every single industry and every single product that we touch. And if it doesn't happen, I think we have failed at properly applying the technology, right? So everything that you do, I think there will be a Gen AI element. I think the hype is really how sustainable it is for startup versus large companies, right? So a lot of these are features, these are UI layers on top of existing systems. So short term, I think it's going to be advantageous to large companies, and a lot of the the companies, startups will not be able to create a sustainable advantage and survive. But having said that, I think I feel it's a good opportunity. Like if I was an entrepreneur right now, I would just jump in and do a co-pilot around any technology. You pick up like a Palo Alto Networks, CrowdStrike, and just build like the best experience, and just hope like either for acquisition or later on down the road you can create your own CrowdStrike. But it should not deter you from not doing that right now. And I feel like the incumbents, though people think that they are at an advantage, they are going to be very, very slow. They're going to have a hard time hiring the right people. And in this technology, I think since it's just sort of 6-9 months old, it's coming from a very special segment like OpenAI and Google and everything. There's a lack of talent actually. You can learn things like in a few days, but really being immersed in it and understand it, I think it's rare. So just to wrap it up, I think there's hype, and I think the hype is there for the right reason, because there's just immense possibility. And I said, like, it will be a failure of us if actually, generative AI doesn't touch like every single part of our life, both personal and professional life.
Well, I really like the optimism, and I think that's what is by very nature, the venture capitalist community does, and putting the right support behind disruptive areas that could change the lives of not just small but many people. So I think there is definitely that optimism that we need to continue forward. So take the stage over next to Chris in terms of a builder. You just heard Pramod, who's talking from a investor perspective as to capitalizing on the hype and bringing and enabling more builders into the space who can actually take advantage of this immense power potential that we have. What do you see if it were possible for you to change, Chris? I mean, I think this is an open question probably for all of you. What would be your one wish that we could ask this AI genie to give you that we could probably make happen if all come together?
I think the wish is already coming to fruition. And so, technology throughout its history, it's all about making things simpler, easier, cheaper. And I think Gen AI has already shown that it can do that when it comes to building things. And so, take Amazon, AWS. And so, it used to be you ordered a server, you waited a couple of weeks, you installed it, you waited for your admins to, load on Windows, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. 3 months later, you've got your box. EC2, you launch it in 3 minutes. And so now I think as we look at Gen AI, I think the wish that I've had for technology in general recently is that, we've gotten great tools like AWS, but how do we keep those tools secure? How do we make it easier for a new developer? How do we make it easy for a business person to take advantage of those tools? And I think that's where Gen AI is already showing a lot of promise. Generate a secure config for AWS so that we've got appropriate policies in place to protect my assets and make sure that I don't get a bucket negligence award with S3. I can get ChatGPT to generate that code for me. And so I think, my wish is that we continue to democratize the process of building technology. We make it easier for people to do that the right way. We don't want to see a big regression in building insecure code. All the old XSS vulnerabilities, SQL injection, all those things that we now have nice tools to prevent. We need Gen AI to help us get similar capabilities, and so where Gen AI hallucinates, where Gen AI generates code that is using libraries that are 3 years out of date, not helping us to do that. And so I think, the wish is, let's use this technology to help us do good things for business, do things, good things for consumers, do good things for our customers. Let's help it to be able to do that in a responsible, secure manner. And when we think about responsibility, think about things like our environmental impact. Saw a really interesting stat that in the month of May, ChatGPT used the same amount of electricity as a city of 175,000 people. Just a massive, physical, real world cost. And so, if we're, I think Pramod is 100% right in that, this should help improve all aspects of our life. As we do that, are we, letting an AI genie out of the bottle? That big word that you hear about when you talk to a lot of people. Are we having a profound ecological impact on the planet? And so, wonderful tool, amazing power. I think to the whole point of this forum, we have to make sure we use it responsibly, and that we use it then to enable more productivity and doing good things for people around the globe.
Excellent. I think hope all those wishes come true, but I know we have to work towards that, right? It just won't happen by itself. So thank you, Chris, for being a builder as much as I know for a defender. Moving on to Samir, and I think flip the question, right? If you have the wishes ready, please come on, or let's flip the question and see what one bad thing that could happen that we should all kind of unite to protect and defend. One or more. I'm sure there are people writing tomes on this one.
So I actually had a wish. Well, let me just complete my wish really quick, because I wish that we don't have more bolt-on solutions for AI. I see a lot of startups being funded where you have to, you're gonna get your solution, and then you're gonna get a bunch of tools to protect it. Right? It should be built in, not bolted on, as we grow. On the flip side, I think one bad thing that's happening, in my opinion, and this really goes to a little bit different angle in terms of investment, is it feels like, and I talk to a lot of angels, I talk to a lot of VCs who only want to invest in a company that has the word Gen AI in their pitch deck, right? And everything else is being left out, right? Almost like, oh, that's boring, that's not an interesting idea. I don't want us to miss the forest for the trees in cybersecurity in particular, where there's a lot of very interesting capabilities that are being built that don't have a Gen AI component, right? So let's not over-index on one. As Pramod said, he's seen this for 10 years, right? Not every use case for Gen AI is going to be successful. So let's not jump on that bandwagon and ignore other opportunities for products and services to come out that can really drive cybersecurity as an industry forward.
That's great, and I think that's being responsible, right? The appropriate use of technology, regardless of how hyped up or how potent it is, I think is in the hands of the builders, and that's where responsibility comes into applying it to the right. And I think technologists are and entrepreneurs in general need that that support to maintain and move forward the investments that are already been made in the right direction. So thank you, Samir, for being very candid about it. Well, coming back to Pramod, both something good and bad that you see, what is exciting for you, and what would one wish that you would want to have, and probably something that you'd never want to see.
Yeah. So something good is I think there's just a lot of excitement and people are building stuff, right? So that is good. I think there should be more of it. The bad part is, I think, like particularly on the enterprise side, on the security side, like everybody is sort of jumping on the model side, and everybody's saying, okay, ChatGPT doesn't work, I'm going to create my own security model. And I was just chatting with a founder yesterday, and I was just like, build everything around that solution first, and then work on the model later on. So everyone is wanting to like raise $10 million, $20 million, and as Samir was saying, people see that as a mode, as a Gen AI, but you could actually not do anything on the model side until like Series A, Series B, solve all of the problems around it, workflows, everything, use the existing Gen AI capabilities. I think that's a bad part I see, is that people are raising more money, and it's a problem both on the founders and investor side, because people think model is the way the mode is. To me, I think it's a long-term mode, not a short-term mode. Short-term mode is really, can you solve a problem with Gen AI? So that's a bad part. The good and the thing that I think what I what I fear about is I think a lot of people still don't get it that this is not a real artificial intelligence. Like this is just predicting the next token, right? So I think that is something that people are just not getting it. People are expecting it to do wonders and like make decisions and everything, but all it's done is it can just predict you the next best token, right? So that is something that people are thinking of like a chat GPT as a supercomputer, like, hey, I can ask any questions and it will actually give me the right answer. But at the end of the day, it's just sort of predicting, right? So that is a bad part, is where we use this where, I mean, forget even hallucinating, right? It's just not the right use of that technology. I think that I fear the most.
Right. So no, I think that absolutely rounds out, even tease into the next conversation we're going to have. And I know Diana, Malcolm have expressed their deep concerns around the too much trust, right? I think people have put in this, and it's not just laymen putting trust; it's experts putting trust into this. And I think that's where the pitfall is for us, right? So while there is a philosophical angle of this, how and where this can go in terms of completely changing human and societal landscape, accessing the information that human text has amassed over the last several decades and centuries of written text, but now applying that to actual practical use. I think I feel very optimistic that this will be put to good use, and these conversations are essential to have. And through these conversations will evolve the generic framework and guardrails that are required to make appropriate investments into this, but also put into and implement AI in general, Gen AI specifically, into good use. So again, thank you all, Chris, Samir, Pramod, for having this very deep and insightful conversation. I'm sure this is the first of many, and we'll continue to tap into your expertise and your insights to advance this particular journey of ours. Thank you again. Have a good rest of the day. And with that, let's move on to our next panel to close out today's conversation around Gen AI and broader responsible and secure AI. I think that Malcolm, we have heard from the first town hall, and now bringing Diana into the same conversation. I believe it's a fitting team to wrap this up in terms of building secure AI, and capping it up with the responsibility guardrails, right? So welcome, Diana. Great to see you. Malcolm, welcome back. Great to have you to close this out. Diana, I'll let you give you a little bit of introduction and background. I'm excited to see that you are taking on the protector and defender role of AI, protect AI. And as much as we have enjoyed working together, I think the builder needs a protector. You have always been that. So please reintroduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks so much. I've been in IT for over 30 years, and most of it networking. I got really interested in AppSec as soon as I realized no matter what I did at layer 3, what was going on at layer 7 kept impacting my security. And I got initially interested in AI back in the 1970s. So people were like, "You're making that up." But no, there was a professor at MIT, Joseph Wiseman, who created a product, an app called, a piece of software called ELIZA, which was a very early AI version. So, it's actually been around a lot longer than I think people really understand. And I got interested in it. I was like, is this alive? Is it thinking? So that was my first introduction. And then when I was at IBM Security, we were at IBM Security training Watson for cyber. So I got very close again to AI, training it and what's going on, and LLMs, and trying to understand how they can help people. And I am simultaneously so thrilled and excited by what we can do with AI and ML, and also very cautious about deploying it and using it responsibly and ethically.
Absolutely, Diana. And I see that you're practically doing that. So really have hope and faith that we'll go about this in the right way.
Absolutely.
Well,
That's why I joined Protect AI as the CISO, is that, it's just, I know we have to get this right.
Yeah. Okay. Malcolm, welcome back. And now let's turn from the broad thinking that we have into a little bit more concrete on this securing AI aspect, your thoughts to kick off this conversation?
Yeah, as we chatted a little bit earlier this morning, and I think Diana, you mentioned this as well. I believe in the hope and the potential for artificial intelligence and machine learning to do a lot of good. And I think in many cases it already has started to do that. But as I said, as our opportunities to leverage technology grow, so does our obligations to do it right. And I think AI and ML is unique in our way with computing. And some would argue we've already, kind of hit the limits of Moore's law. Again, I grew up at Intel in terms of compute capacity from a silicon perspective. But when you think of the capacity to, again, generate things new and different and speed up and improve, what we're doing and how we're doing it, it's a different way of looking at Moore's law. And I think that artificial intelligence and machine learning really is creating that more expansive opportunity for new things that we haven't seen in such a long time. But again, along with that, you've got to do proactive threat discovery, right? Look at the models that people are using, check for tampering, hijacking, things that shouldn't be there. We've got to, evaluate the model behavior in real time all the time when they're out there. And, again, much like we've had to do, hashing and code signing for other applications like that, we got to start doing that for, our ML models and really have some level of attestation that the model that we're using is the model that we think that we're using. And again, it's behaving the same way. And then much like whether it's your network and stuff like that, where are those external assessments? Where's the pen testing? We've got to take all the things that we've been doing in other aspects of computing and apply it into the machine learning and artificial intelligence space. How you do it is different, but those same concepts are there that we've got to including asset management. I mean, models are a program, just a different type of program, right? So if we're doing software asset management and hardware asset management, we need to, in some cases, ML and AI asset management. Where are they? What is their function? Where do they sit? Where does the data go? I mean, it's the same traditional things. It's just applied in this new compute model, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think basing on the foundation that we've already had, this doesn't need to go away farther from that. And I think, drawing insights from the previous conversation we had with the panel was about tying this back to that, and then seeing this over a period of time, how the language model learns and evolves. So Diana, let me turn to you. From the very beginning, we have discussed this internally as well as in the broader communities about the trust that we put in AI, and you were very, I think, clear in pointing out from the very beginning as to the harm it can do by providing wrong answers. And I think that's where people really don't understand as to how to harness the full potential of this technology without what guardrails to use in that case, right? When the end user is responsible for determining good or bad, right, and choosing bad over good.
Yeah, I mean, it's we're almost predisposed to think, how many times have you heard computers are smarter than me? The computer said it. And if you think about in our world, right, for example, if I gave you two 10-digit numbers and I asked you to multiply those numbers, would you get out your pen and paper and do it by hand, or would you use a calculator? Probably you're going to take out your phone and use the calculator function. Now, once the calculator gives you a number, do you go, I better validate that. And then you get out your pen and paper and you do it by hand to make sure that the calculator was right. Or do you go, there's no way I could do that multiplication, that whatever the calculator says is right. And that's the base of how we trust systems, because these systems appear in some ways smarter than us because they can calculate large numbers more quickly than we can do. They're capable of doing things very often computationally, mathematically related that are impossible for humans to do on our own, or very, very, very difficult. So we get into this mind space of, oh, they're smarter than us. And you've seen this with the headlines around Gen AI, for example. Look at all the headlines that were saying, oh, ChatGPT, it's in the 90th percentile for the bar. It's so smart, right? And a lawyer decided it was so smart that this lawyer used ChatGPT to create a legal brief for a case that this person was trying. And the legal brief was not particularly well written. I wouldn't know. I'm not a lawyer. I can't assess if it's well written or not. But B, the judge didn't think it was well written. But the most important thing was that it cited previous legal cases, case law that didn't exist. And in AI parlance, as I heard on the previous group, hallucinations, right? That would officially be called a hallucination. But really, it's just wrong. It was inaccurate information that then got presented in a court of law. So is ChatGPT smarter than a lawyer? Well, it can pass the bar at 90th percentile, but it's not able to argue a case with actual case law, at least in this instance with those prompts that it received. So that's, I think, where we get to this trust issue, is that if we're asking a question of this system and we don't know the answer, how are we going to be able to validate if it's correct or not? Now, in the case of calculators, they are accurate, save for, and Malcolm, you'll probably like this one, the floating point error.
I was thinking about that. Believe it or not.
Yeah. The floating point error, where there was an issue with the software interacting with the hardware, and it was miscalculating the information that was going into the spreadsheet
the 20th digit in some floating point calculation. For those that don't remember, it was the Pentium flaw. If you look,
Pentium, that's right.
Or early 95.
Yeah. But save that. And that was almost 20 years ago now. We know that when we're using calculators on, online, on our smart devices, an Excel spreadsheet, it's accurate. Those calculations are accurate. But where we're not always accurate is in responses to LLMs. So you can go to ChatGPT and ask it questions and it'll get completely wrong. I've asked it a number of times what cybersecurity books Diana Kelly has written. It always comes up with a list of fantastic books and an explanation of how wonderful Diana Kelly wrote those books. They're never books that I actually wrote. One time it actually said that I had written Secrets and Lies, the great Bruce Schneier bestseller, and discussed how wonderful my writing was in it. So apologies to Bruce Schneier. I never wrote that book. I wish I had. But that's what I mean about the trust, is that if we think in that mindset of, I can't add large numbers together, the calculator's right, and we apply it to these LLMs that are not at that level of accuracy, we can go down some very, very weird, not great paths, including going into a court of law, apparently, with fake case law in our brief.
Hey, well, politicians do that and use ChatGPT.
Yeah. So no, I think, these are very nuanced applications, and it doesn't take long to identify. I think it's probably going back to the philosophical realm of, how do you know yourself? Ask ChatGPT, and then you know that that's not true.
Right.
So it doesn't get further than that. I think it's very, within a few interactions, a general person with general intelligence can find out that it's not the most trusted source that people will be learning to. It's very entertaining, but it's not very productive or factful. So with that, let me kind of open up the next level in terms of actual controls and implementation. See, regardless of whether we like it or not, I think, we have port security controls, and all it needs is a personal device somebody can go to, and they can access this. So we had this identity control discussion earlier with Samir, and previously on the other panels, we talked about the general controls. But are there anything specific, Malcolm, maybe start with you, that you would like us to think about in terms of tying this back to the base, the foundational frameworks that we have. I mean, even basic as, NIST CSF framework, everybody's aware of that, or at least most of us are in the general parlance. And how can we apply and tie this back so that, we take responsible steps forward?
Yeah, well, I think, again, like I said, there's some of the controls that we do in other application development and devices and systems and networks that we just need to think about how to apply in the artificial intelligence and machine learning space. Vulnerability scanners. Well, what's the vulnerability scanner for the ML model? To look for poisoning, to look for malicious code that's embedded in the gray space of the model, to look for data poisoning, right? To look for the inputs and outputs and the potential manipulation. Then, so you got all those upfront, but also production controls that you need to do. And then post-production, when the models are live, again, if you've done the right hashing and basically signing of the model, then you still need real-time protection. The concept of EDR that we're familiar all with in the endpoint space. Well, where's your machine learning detection and response to wrap around for that kind of real-time detection of the model and identification of, threats and attacks against it? We've got to take those same concepts that we're used to and apply them in the ML space. Now, and again, in some cases, can I do that for generative AI that's out there on the internet? No. Can I do it for the ML models that are in my operations? Absolutely. Should I push, pressure, require of my vendors that are using ML models and AI in the application that I get to demonstrate they have an appropriate security development lifecycle and privacy by design, as well as they have real-time protection for it? Yes. All those things we can do today. The challenge still becomes things like generative AI and ChatGPT. How do you protect yourself against that when your employees might be leveraging that technology either on network or off network? And, and I think we've already talked about that. For that, there's probably no great ideas other than, one that I had a peer discussion on last week about, again, how to enable your employees to use it, but provide appropriate controls around what they might put into it, because they could be exposing intellectual property, they could be exposing, personally identifiable information. And, my simple, approach on that, no different than when I was back at Intel and some of the first social media stuff came up. Ban it. What I did was, if they were on network, you do broad-based training and awareness, but if they're on network, you can put a splash screen before somebody goes to a URL and say, you're about to go enter this risky thing. Here are your obligations, and here's the things you can't do. Keep it short, simple, sweet. And if they agree to accept staying within those parameters, guess what? Now you record that information. And if they've gone out of bounds, well, now you can terminate them for cause, because you've made it very clear before they entered, going GPT, they were doing something risky, and you clearly articulated to them what their obligations were to protect the company. And if they violate it, they're fired. I don't care if it's the CEO or the lowest level admin who's just trying to write an executive memo for, department manager.
Yeah, I was wondering if I could just tag on to something that Malcolm just said about building security in and shifting left into an ML SecOps mindset, because I think that a lot of organizations don't understand two big attack surfaces that are developing in their organizations. One is not AI related, but it's infrastructure as code, right? We've got the IT team is now essentially your engineering or dev team, and they're terraforming whole new parts of your network, possibly outside of the regular oversight of the CISO and the NetOps team. Hopefully in oversight, but I've seen a lot of times it's outside of oversight. Another, and I'm going to get to AI, another big space where we're sort of outside of the typical pipelines is in ML. So the CI/CD pipeline, you're all hooked into Jira, you're doing your automated SAST, But what's going on in ML pipelines is that a lot of times the ML engineers are setting things up. They may not be part of the regular DevSecOps group, they're MLSecOps. And then they've got data scientists who are working with Python scripts inside of Jupyter notebooks, very often with a lot of secrets. And by secrets, I mean PII and PHI and sometimes API keys or just other sensitive info. And these are outside of the normal scanning or the normal purview of most DevSecOps and CISO teams. So we need to bring those in. To Malcolm's point, absolutely, we need to bring those in. We need to start looking at things like ML bombs, bill of materials related to machine learning. And no, they're not going to be exactly the same as our software bombs, because that doesn't mean that they're impossible or we can't do it. It just means that we need to get the tools and bring it into the systems that we have for DevSecOps so that we've got visibility into MLSecOps and how people are developing and deploying, because that's really critical. And again, it's one of these things where it happened so fast that I talked to a number of CISOs at companies where I know there's a lot of analytics work going on, which means there's a lot of ML going on in Jupyter notebooks, and they don't understand that that's an attack surface yet. So there's some education that we need to complete.
Yeah, well, and to even, Diana, give some concrete examples. I'll give an Intel example. They've published papers on it, and I also used to work there. And the data science team used to report up into me at one point in time. So Intel published how they're using AI and ML for yield improvement in factories, right? Internal application, I'm assuming homegrown at this point and stuff like that. And it's been around in some way, shape, or form for 15 years to do that, right? So you go, okay, well, how could that create a risk for whether it be an Intel or a Toyota, any manufacturing company is doing the same thing? Well, one of two things. One, if I can, which you can do, able to gain access to that model and do an inference attack, I could theoretically, because that yield stuff for a manufacturing is going to have a lot of sensitive trade secret information on your manufacturing processes, all those types of things. If I can do an inference attack, I could actually exfiltrate information and exfiltrate trade. Risk number one, material impact to a business. The other aspect that I would consider as a CISO in that situation is if I could the model in a way, poison it in a way, manipulate it in a way to affect yield. As soon as I've done that, I've had also now a revenue impact, a product cost impact, gross margin impact, and depending upon how much that ML is used to control factory operations, I could potentially manipulate it in a way that, in essence, I could ransom the factory. Sure. And instead of just ransoming it a different way, I go do it at the ML model itself. Right. So again, I think where you've got to look at the application of where you're using machine learning and artificial intelligence, those material risks to your business, and then go, okay, what's the probability of those things happening? Because the bad guys will look at that and go, if they can make money or exfiltrate intellectual property, they're going to do it. Because they've done it in every other setting, whether it be the application network, your endpoint, your database, your cloud. So why not the ML model?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you just lined out so many issues that we can probably peel and dig into. Defender, legal, regulatory, and core business. I think we all need to address that holistically. So absolutely agree with that. What I want to probably add to that topic is the privacy issue, which I believe will be another fascinating, as much as IP and legal liability is there is this whole privacy. I think someone from the audience asked about this, that there will be need for more and more and more data, right? Especially those feeding those large language models, both from the core technology providers who are building these LLMs and those that are applying those. I think there is going to be need for data on both sides. Any thoughts on how we can address that from both in terms of general responsibility, but also in terms of privacy, knowing that a lot of the information that's going to be fed in are going to be publicly available sources, but deeply, personal and sensitive. That's going to be, not very good use of data, right? Maybe Diana, you can give your little bit more philosophical, but again, I would say that is definitely grounded on technology that our controls are being today.
Well, the previous panel, and I think, and then Malcolm touched on this too, discussed some of the basic blocking and tackling is, at the very least, don't have your current employees interacting with these systems and spilling secrets into these systems, which then might be extracted from the system later on, unintentionally. So there was an issue with Samsung Semiconductor, I believe it was, where they were asking questions of one of the LLMs. And then later, although the LLM was not supposed to be being trained within a private session and then sharing that information did come back out to another during another session. So number one, make sure that all of your employees understand what it means to use a public LLM, and that they're not putting anything very secret in there. And if you're thinking, well, who would put something secret? I mean, a great example is CEOs people are just using ChatGPT and the LLMs to write emails and memos because it's really good. It's a probability predictive system. So it's very good at creating words, putting words together in a logical way that are grammatically correct. So people are using it to write business documents, of course. So there are some CEOs and other heads of companies that know about things like acquisitions that could have an SEC impact, for example, using ChatGPT or another LLM to try and get the words right. Well, while you're getting the words right, you've probably got a prompt in there that's very, very specific about what you want about that acquisition. So being really, really good with a security awareness, with training your users on interacting with these LLMs so that they don't have this sense of that it's just private between them and the software, that this data could be going other places. Then the other big question is the lake houses that we're using to train the LLMs. Now, some of them, yes, they're just reasoning over the entire internet, and then they have to be trained and tuned because there's a lot out there. And so you have to make sure that you've increased the accuracy, you've trained that system. But there's also being trained on anonymized data within the lakehouse or whatever data set that you're using that may become de-anonymized. Privacy experts can tell you that with 3 pieces of data, I think, what is it, your zip code, your age, and your gender, you can get almost an exact match on who you're talking about. So when we see anonymized individual data, when it gets reconnected, sometimes even when you reconnect just little bits and you don't think that's going to be enough to pinpoint who or what it's about, you can actually put that back together. And there's been interesting research. One was on a model that had been trained on healthcare information. And what the researchers found out, and it was supposed to be anonymized, but researchers found out that just by knowing where that person went to have the procedure and a small bit of public information about the person, they were able to extract from the model enough information to guess at a very high accuracy rate what kind of service, what kind of health activity that person, what they were actually treated for when they went into the hospital. So it's that kind of privacy concern that I think we also have to look at very closely. These big lake houses that are being used, big data sets that are being used to train, we may think that they're training on anonymous data, or that the data that they trained on, while not anonymous, cannot be leaked back out. And in both cases, it's been seen that that's not always correct. So we really have to be very, very careful to make sure that we are building and protecting the privacy within these systems.
Absolutely, and I think you hit it on the head. Is the focus on privacy is even more important here. And I don't know, somehow maybe this is very natural that across the entire conversation we had with AI, healthcare and privacy came up every time, because I think it's very personal. People are definitely very, very concerned about how this will be applied and the data that is going to feed into to actually provide the capabilities that it provides, right?
And doctors, there was a doctor, I just saw a headline this week, a doctor's been using an LLM to be more empathic with, but that means if they're got to give hard news to a patient and they're putting it in the LLM.
Yeah.
You know,
That's going to be a very key source of data going in, and then how you train, right? We talked about prompt engineering. I think Samir mentioned the last one, as to what you ask is what you get, and what you're actually asking is informing the LLMs to kind of come up with the next one in a little more nuanced way, right? So, well, we got 5 more minutes. Maybe quick takeaways on the overall structure and guidance we want to put together. And Malcolm, any high-level bullets you want us to consider? See, I'll just give it a little context, because almost 12, 13 years back, when cloud was the big deal, and it was still a hype, and we put together Cloud Security Alliance, and that organization has evolved over so much time, and with the great leadership of Jim and those researchers that have actually enabled, and the working groups. I think something sort of that is probably going to be required here. I saw World Economic Forum just put together an alliance for responsible AI. Aspiration-wise with CFF, and both in terms of aspiration as a responsibility, we definitely think this is an area that would equate with the work that we're doing on the cyber board book side. So democratizing the knowledge and the engagement of cyber and board. I think Gen AI is an area which will have multiple agencies and organizations putting together the framework. But I think it's probably a good place to put our collective intelligence in. So anything that you can guide us around high-level bullets that you can take on?
Yeah, so, and I mentioned this earlier, there's some things you necessarily technically control for, which is why, back in my silence days, we had a code of conduct for the data science team. Particularly when you start getting to perturbation and even machine data and anything that you can infer about a person or whatever, I wanted them to think of in some ways that data was toxic, like a chemical. And when you start combining it in different ways, you could create an environmental issue. And I think if we started thinking of data elements like we do with chemistry, grew up in a factory, you had chemical engineers, they just couldn't combine shit together and throw it out there. They had to be in a safe environment. They had to understand that, yeah, they're experimenting certain things, but they had to do it in a very safe way. Otherwise, they could create something harmful that could hurt them or hurt others. And I have to have the people that are collecting and processing data and doing all that stuff start having a mental model like these things are hazardous. And if we did some of those data elements that way, and we wrote a code of conduct that didn't, curtail their exploration and innovation, but caused them to pause as they were doing things so that they could recognize when they were on a slippery slope. And again, a real example from when I was at Intel, we were developing a product called Persona, your mouse movements, keystrokes, and all that stuff to figure out if, Malcolm behind the keyboard. Well, guess what? Once you start having some of that, you could start inferring, is Malcolm impaired? Is there a medical issue? Is he on drugs? And if you have his IP address and his location, you might find out he's in a bar. Or, so you could start doing all these things that, on the one hand, you could say that's appropriate in a work environment to figure out if somebody's doing while they're impaired. On the other hand, you could say in many cases, that's a real privacy slippery slope in terms of what you do with that information and where it decisions you make around it, because it could be that Malcolm's not impaired. It could be that Malcolm's having a medical issue. Well, on the one hand, flagging that could be a good thing. So you have to think about, as you gather this data for one purpose, there might be unintended uses of that information, and you really need to be specific on what your use case is and hold off those other potential areas unless, again, there's value in doing so. And then if there's value in doing so, how you walk the path to open up those other use cases has to be thought through.
Excellent. I think this hits it home in terms of what we have been trying to underpin, like what is the seriousness about, building and the responsibility we need to have. It's not technology, drives humanity, and humanity should have at least some control, if not all. But I think this also shows that unintended consequences may be good, put into good use, but very much into bad hands will be put into bad use. So thank you, Malcolm, for that. Diana, your closing comments and thoughts as to where we drive this forward.
Yeah, of course, everything that Malcolm said, and I love the idea of a code of conduct specifically for your ML and data science teams. The one thing I would put in is threat modeling. Whether you're building or you're buying systems with AI and ML, and now a lot of systems have ML and the machine learning, make sure that you understand the threat model related to that, because a lot of what's going on is we haven't thought about it yet, because this is fairly new in terms of adoption in a lot of organizations. It's been, as I said, sort of outside of the regular realm of what CISOs and even AppSec teams have been looking at. So bring it in to your organizational programs, and that means to threat model both what and how you build for the features and functions to avoid some of those gotchas that Malcolm was talking about, but also as you're assessing new vendors and bringing in new solutions to your organization.
That is great. So I think I got my 2 high-level bullets and takeaways that we can actually work on: the code of conduct and a reference threat model that probably can be used across the community. So excellent conversation, and thank you so much for taking the time to come and share your thoughts. Malcolm, back again, twice now. I feel I got a bonus. So. And then Diana, thank you. I know you are slammed with the new role, so I'm so excited to see you back again, and looking forward to take this conversation and actually action. This is in a series of activities that are very much tied together with the CFF initiatives that we have been running. And just to recap this conversation that we have had through the discussion we have had for the last 3 hours. I think first thing is, needless to say, this is a fantastic opportunity for humanity in general to unleash the next, technological revolution, a democratization of access to information and data, but do it responsibly. Responsible use. I think it's dual: responsible use as to how we can harness the technology. Sometimes as just entertainment or toward completion, but be realistic about the expectation and the trust that we put on these elements. On the other side, for builders, responsible development and engineering of these systems with the right set of guardrails, with right set of respect to privacy, with the consideration for the need to avoid bias, the ability to actually be transparent about what is being built. And what in fact concerns me is that those that are building it are not able to explain. I don't know if it's intentional or not, but still I have not been very convinced that the largest builders of LLM platforms are not able to explain, and they're very skeptical about what it would be and how the application could be utilized, right? So I think that is definitely we cannot ignore, but definitely a lot of opportunity for us to harness the new excitement around a new technology. I feel like a child again, like trying to explore and being curious about how to apply and use it. In fact, being very transparent and candid about the fact that I for small organizations, this is a great benefit. And the small team we have at CFF, we are able to use ChatGPT to get some of the collective insight. But I think that's where the responsibility comes in as to how you use it, how much of you use it, how do you vet it with our collective knowledge, and our personal responsibility to guard against that. On the enterprise and the corporate side, I believe the responsibility is that we are taking the obligation on us and the responsibility on ourselves to how you use what information we share through the prompts of ChatGPT, and how we integrate, even when we scale this to the API machine to machine level interaction to inform our business and inform our general technology landscape. We have some guardrails, we have some intervention to use it to for the right purpose. I take on with a lot of optimism what Malcolm mentioned about the unintended use, and then could be used to put to bad use, or maybe put to good use in terms of medical outcomes that are positive rather than negative. In terms of privacy, as Diana, you mentioned about ensuring that we are able to continue to respect the information that we get and assimilate and accumulate, there is going to be more and more use of this towards actually informing the LLM models, but protecting the inference engines not to come up with information that is would be put to bad use, right? So I think whether it's philosophical, whether it's technical, I think we have a huge obligation on this community to come up with frameworks and guardrails. This definitely is the first of many conversations. I thank you all for the work that you're doing and advancing the defenders prerogative, and looking forward to working with you more. So thank you again. Thanks for all for joining this conversation. Looking forward to many more excellent conversation. Thank you, Malcolm.
Thanks, Val.
Thank you. Okay. All right. This concludes our town hall for responsible and secure AI. Of course, the conclusion of this town hall means the initiation of an active project and engagement with the rest of the community to advance the work that we're doing. We look forward to your inputs and insights. I know many of you had conflicts, not able to join. So this is available across all channels that CFF has reached into. Please dive into the LinkedIn Live, which will have recorded conversation. We will paste this URLs for you to access. It's also available on YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. So follow us and give us your collective wisdom so that we can actually make use of the vast amount of power and potential that generative AI has in driving us forward. So thank you again. Have a great rest of the day. God bless you. Take care.